A stunningly beautiful woman in professional attire is being berated by her boss in the office, who demands his employee redo a report after hours. If she doesn't finish it, he'll fire her. She's the general manager of the company, but she's the only one staying up all night working overtime. Assistant June notices her boss will be there all night, but she just shrugs, thinking it's no big deal. She thought everything was fine because she herself always worked late, but she was dead wrong. Her name is Hannah, and she died at her desk. She couldn't feel her body, but she knew something had exploded. It was awful, but even in that moment, she was all alone. Dying at work was a fucking tragedy. To be honest, for her, there was also a sense of relief in it all. At some point, the pain disappeared, and she couldn't even recognize herself in the mirror. A man was standing in front of her, yelling and spewing insults. It turns out her new name is Velletta Olden, and the man was furious because she had been ignoring Margaret. The protagonist never thought something like this would happen to her. She was reborn into a game world, possessing the body of the villainess. In this world, the heroine must choose one of 5 men, and this game was ranked #1 in Korea. On one hand, she was glad she died because she hated her old life, but the problem was she was reborn as the villainess. Velletta Olden is the daughter of a marquis, and she's breathtakingly beautiful. But don't be fooled by her appearance. Her personality is quite nasty. Margaret is the sweetheart heroine who thought Velletta was her friend, but the Marquis's daughter was always working against her. In short, at the end of the game, one of Margaret's suitors kills Velletta. To be precise, her brother kills her because he's head over heels for Margaret. Velletta remembers she had been avoiding Margaret, which is why Margaret finally blew up. When she realized Luther had a crush on her friend, she burst out laughing, and that's when he lost his mind and swung his fist at her. But she wasn't about to let him hit her. So she played a little trick, falling to her knees and begging for forgiveness, which completely caught Luther off guard. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and the guy had no idea what his sister was plotting. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, saying he didn't know what she was up to, but he wouldn't let her get away with it. The guy swore that if she continued to ignore or disrespect Margaret in any way, he would make her pay. After he left, the girl looked up, realizing she was furious about how things had turned out. The way Luther treated her like dirt stung her deeply. She hated this situation, so she was going to get rid of her brother and his friend at all costs. Velletta knew the only way for her to have a good ending was to get Margaret out of the picture. She rang a bell and summoned a maid. Then she ordered the maid to bring Margaret to her room. As soon as the maid left, Velletta opened the game's quest window. She began to study it carefully. It said that if she messed up the quest, the game would never end. This was ridiculous because she had never designed such a menu for Velletta's character. She had designed this game in her past life, so this ending felt completely wrong, and she decided to rewrite it to her liking. The heroine Margaret was sweet, kind, and gentle, exactly the type of girl who could attract the attention of 4 men. Yes, everyone loved her, but she also ultimately led to Velletta's death. Alright, the girls met. The protagonist knew the first thing she had to do was get her so-called friend to trust her, so she squeezed out a few crocodile tears and asked her guest if she had offended her in any way. Velletta said she never expected Margaret to visit because she thought Margaret was still angry about being ignored. The Marquis's daughter apologized for mistreating her friend all this time and asked for forgiveness. Just then, Margaret started hugging Velletta, saying she was never angry about something like that. The protagonist knew that the real Marquis's daughter would never apologize to a friend. Margaret was so sweet and trusting that Velletta decided not to let her fall into the wrong hands. Just then, she learned that Luther had been scolding and bad-mouthing his sister, which frustrated her. The developer realized she was starting to pave the way for her own happy ending, because if she remained friends with this girl, her life would be like a garden in full bloom. When it was time for dinner, the table was filled with all sorts of dishes. Then someone put something strange on her plate. Most importantly, she didn't know which fork to use, and tonight was the family head's lavish dinner party. The entire Olden family was gathered around the dining table. Carlos Olden did this once every 2 weeks, gathering his heirs, the children with gray hair and green eyes. Only these children were allowed to live in the mansion. The rest had to leave with their mothers. During these dinners, Carlos would scrutinize his offspring, so the tense and distrustful atmosphere was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. The girl knew he had his own unique standard for judgment and thought she was done for. She had no idea what to do, while one of her brothers was busy sucking up to their father. The girl knew that if the flattery went too far, it could lead to big trouble. Luther interjected, saying his brother was speaking of unconfirmed intelligence. The father was also displeased that his son was providing information not backed by facts. Everything was going as she expected, but she had no time to worry about others. Velletta knew she had to start eating, but she was afraid of making a mistake and wished she had brought a servant to the dinner. The girl started cutting her meat cautiously, which drew a strange reaction from her brothers. Everything would have been fine if a piece of meat hadn't flown up and landed right on her forehead. This comical act annoyed her father, who had previously demanded they not make a fuss. He sent her away from the table and said she was not to leave her room until she learned her manners. The Marquis said that since she hadn't learned her manners by the age of 18, he wouldn't hesitate to dispose of her permanently. Luther was pleased with the outcome, escorted his sister back to her room, and prepared to lock her in. The guy considered the girl a disgrace to the family. Velletta was left alone in her room. Since the protagonist had created this game world, it wasn't too different from her own. So she sincerely apologized to Velletta and promised to make things right. The protagonist passed the time by reading the latest news, and what she read confirmed her worst fears. So magic existed in this world, along with magical artifacts that could be used to cast spells. These magical items symbolized the power held by swordsmen and mages. The Olden family regularly supplied these items to the Imperial palace, which was why they were so wealthy. But the worst part was that the raw material for these magical artifacts was people. The Olden family had been secretly capturing people, and those without magical abilities were sold as slaves at auctions. The place where her family conducted all these dirty dealings was called Ananta. There were now 3 years until the game's main event. Velletta knew another gathering was happening soon, and she decided to check it out. Most importantly, she was furious that her father thought it was okay to throw a stake at her head. The day came, and the girl put on a cloak, deciding to follow her relatives. Although she was very nervous, she had been waiting for this day. While preparing, she found it was actually quite difficult to find plain clothes. Velletta knew she had to act decisively, so she opened the map. The good news was that she could use any type of map here, which allowed her to access secret passages. This made her think that she might be able to find a secret passage in the Imperial city as well. So, Velletta mustered her courage and moved forward. After leaving home, she arrived at Vintaga Alley, where a group of cloaked people had gathered. It was then that the girl realized cheat codes were the best fucking thing in the world. She didn't plan on bidding at the auction. She just needed to get inside. But she lacked both money and an invitation. Velletta sincerely hoped she wouldn't run into anyone. She knew Luther had probably been rejected by Margaret again, but her father and other brothers might be here today. All right, the auction began. The auctioneer said that if anyone saw something they wanted, they should raise the numbered paddle they received at the entrance. The first item was a man who had just turned 18, looking healthy and strong. Here, people weren't treated as human. They wore magical shackles on their hands and feet that would explode if they tried to escape. She started to cry as she realized she was the one who had created this horrible place. Time flew by, and it was already the 8th item. Just then, the girl's legs began to feel weak, but she couldn't even look away. The crowd started to stir as if something crazy was about to happen, but the girl didn't know what. In the cage were a man and a woman, captured on the Great Plains, twins from the Tang clan. Velletta's jaw dropped in shock as she processed what the host had said. She hadn't expected today to be the day. The Tang clan were a free and fierce people from the Great Plains, which made that region dangerous for outsiders. Sometimes unique children with different colored eyes were born among them. They were super powerful and thus raised as warriors. Now, Velletta's revenge was forgotten. She had to save those children at all costs. It was too bad, because in the game, the twins were already dead by the time the Tang clan was first remembered. In the game, they failed to escape the auction, they died, and were then made into a magical artifact. That artifact became an overpowered weapon and eventually fell into the hands of the final villain. That magical item brought nothing but destruction and suffering to this world. Velletta was one of the victims. Knowing all this, she wanted to save these children because otherwise she wouldn't be able to fix anything. The bidding started and the first round of offers was already in. The protagonist knew the twins wouldn't be cheap. The problem was she had no idea what to do. She had snuck in, which meant she was probably penniless and couldn't contact anyone. Just then, a quest popped up. She had to rescue some hostages to gain allies. The quest also offered her a chance to open a new storyline, which was strange because Velletta wasn't supposed to be the main character. She hesitated because unlocking new storylines didn't guarantee they would actually open. Still, she really wanted to help those kids. So Velletta clicked yes and started the quest. And just like that, she made a move that stunned everyone. Because like magic, a number appeared in her hand, and she suddenly had cash in her pocket. Accepting the quest gave her an inventory, specifically a tablet with a number and some game currency. The amount deposited into her account matched the money her company had earned from the game. Velletta was thrilled because she knew all her cash and hard work had paid off in the real world. She looked forward to getting the children, but knew someone would try to use them again. Velletta wanted to nip this apocalypse in the bud. So, yes, she had just bought the 2 children. Now she wondered why the system had given her number 44. For her, the auction was over, and she took the children to a secret passage. The boy and girl were clearly filled with anger and hatred toward her. She knew the first thing she had to do was win their trust. With that in mind, Velletta cut her hand. She dripped her blood onto the girl's shackles, and they began to melt right before their eyes. Just like that, the siblings were free. The protagonist was thrilled. She had succeeded, all thanks to the Olden family blood flowing through her veins. Immediately after, she told them she had a small favor to ask of them. The problem was the children weren't grateful at all and attacked her directly. They said she reeked of a disgusting snake-like smell, just like the guy who had captured them. The boy said he was so hungry he could eat Velletta. It was then that the girl realized she was in big trouble. Freeing the children with her own blood had seemed like a solid plan, but things were quickly spiraling out of control. She had no idea how to explain to the twins that she had nothing to do with their kidnapping. Then she thought, if they're hungry, give them something to eat. So she conjured a mouth-watering cream cake in front of them. A second later, the children started devouring it. She didn't know they were this hungry, or she would have prepared some real food. Velletta hoped they wouldn't be so hostile toward her now. Yes, they were full, but they were still worried the girl would drag them off somewhere. But that wasn't the case. Since she had freed them herself, she intended to let them go. In return, however, she did have one request. The girl needed their help to rescue the other captives because they had the ability to do so. The siblings said, "Why should we listen to your orders?" The girl simply said that she was the one who freed them and gave them food. Things quickly got out of hand, and she told them to spit out the cake. Then Velletta soaked a cloth with her blood and said that if they pressed it against the shackles, they would disappear. But she warned them not to get caught again. After that, she turned and left. She felt that was enough. The children would return to the Great Plains, and they would never meet again. That was fine, but she wondered what new plot twist the game system had in store for her. Meanwhile, at the auction, a full-blown brawl almost broke out because the merchandise, the slaves, had escaped. One buyer demanded the auctioneer refund his money. The handsome nobleman looked out the window, listening to his servant's report. The guy was furious because he had been guaranteed safety. Noah Elsius was berating his servant, calling him useless and full of empty words. The young man was angry because this new buyer showed up, snatched the twins, and then vanished without a trace. The guy's disappearance was like a snake slithering away silently. Noah ordered his servant to keep an eye on both ends of this snake. The guy was frustrated because he didn't get to meet this mysterious buyer. The next day, Velletta was trying to figure out how to use the cutlery. Still, she felt awful. She'd been having nightmares all night because there were two very bad characters in the game. The first was Luther, and the second was Noah. On the surface, he seemed like the perfect partner, a rich, handsome archmage with a title, but he was the one who locked Margaret up. She hated dreaming about him, but at least she didn't run into him at the auction. To make matters worse, the Marquis was chewing out Luther, saying it wasn't that hard to watch over the slaves. Yet he'd messed everything up. After my father finished yelling at my brother, he stormed into her room and started shouting. Luther was angry because while he was getting an earful, his sister was so calm, as if she were about to blow out birthday candles. Then she suggested putting a piece of steak on his head. He didn't expect his sister to fight back like that. Velletta felt the guy was acting out because Margaret had been ignoring him lately. She continued to play this card, saying that if he kept causing trouble for the family, Margaret would suffer. Everything would have been fine, but she caught a glimpse of the twins sitting in a tree, waving at her. The protagonist definitely didn't see that twist coming. She had no idea what they were doing here or what she was supposed to do. Now Luther noticed his sister was starting to act weird, and then she told him to stop thinking about hurting Margaret and that he needed to get lost and leave her alone. She kicked him out of the room and slammed the door behind him. The guy knew his sister's behavior was completely out of character. Afterward, the children came into her room and she asked, "What are you guys doing here?" She really had no idea how they found her. The children were silent, and Velletta started to wonder if she had messed something up. Just then, the twins said the room smelled like meat. Velletta felt their accusing gazes, as if to say, "How could you eat something so delicious without us?" The girl opened her inventory and took out the meat, and the twins' eyes sparkled with anticipation. The children each grabbed a piece and started to eat like crazy. Velletta didn't expect people from the Tang clan to be like a pack of dogs. The girl sat on her bed and asked the children if they had managed to free the other slaves. The twins were silent, but she knew they had fulfilled her request and thanked them for it. Somehow, the children thought she was a mage because she hadn't left the house since yesterday. Velletta didn't expect them to follow her, but she replied that she wasn't a mage and had nothing to do with magic. To them, the girls seemed pretty dense, since she didn't notice them following her yet could conjure cake and meat out of thin air. She didn't like being called a fool, so she threatened to cut off their meat supply if they called her that again. Besides, she didn't want to explain her abilities, and the twins were supposed to be heading back to the Great Plains soon anyway. But the two teenagers refused to go home and decided to follow her instead. Velletta was shocked by this, feeling like all her efforts had been in vain. But the children said that no one would be able to capture them again, to ensure that they needed to take out the person who caught them. The children didn't understand why she was stopping them from killing him, especially when she herself was laughing her head off. The siblings were completely confused, so she tried to explain that a daughter shouldn't be happy about her parent getting killed. But the children saw right through her, saying they knew what was up. Velletta said the twins couldn't just kill her old man and leave because she still needed him. For now, even if they didn't understand, she had no intention of killing Carlos, because he was basically the one who made her who she was. Still, if the twins did kill him, it would be fair retribution. Then, they unexpectedly relented, saying they wouldn't kill the person who kidnapped them. Velletta couldn't figure out why they had changed their minds. It turned out they were prepared to do anything to protect her and stay by her side. The siblings were completely captivated by the girl. The reason they felt this way was because Velletta had helped them, even shedding her own blood. So they decided to do whatever it took to keep her alive, as they desperately wanted to find out what kind of person she really was. After hearing this, Velletta became curious about the teenagers' names. The boy was named Raheel, and the girl was Roxa. Velletta thought their names were beautiful. She hoped that now that they were friends, everyone could get along. Velletta decided to ask them for a favor. Roxa said, "Spit it out, don't waste time." She asked them to find a man named Austin Hill. For days later, Velletta found a strange sack in her room with something inside. Another unexpected turn of events. Upon meeting Austin Hill, the game asked me to make him an ally. He just stood there, watching as the guy walked away from his boss with a flick of his hand. The guy wondered who on earth had hired Austin. Meanwhile, at Velletta's residence, Margaret came to visit. The pink-haired girl came to check in, wanting to know if her friend was all right. The Marquis's daughter didn't understand what she meant, so the girl explained that she had noticed the master of the mansion looking pale recently. It turned out Margaret was worried that Carlos or Luther had done something terrible to her. Velletta assured her friend that her relatives weren't bothering her, and she was just ignoring them anyway. Margaret suddenly said she wished she could be her real sister. The protagonist laughed, telling her she already thought of her as a sister. Velletta had always wanted her friend to call her big sister, even though it was super embarrassing for her. And she didn't understand why she had to be the younger sister since they were the same age. Since Margaret didn't want to be the younger sister, Velletta said she could call her big sister. All right, enough joking around. The Marquis's daughter asked if Luther was still bothering her, and it turned out he had backed off a bit. Margaret confessed she hated Luther's behavior and didn't understand why he just wouldn't leave her alone. That being the case, Velletta decided to help the girl with her main problem. The protagonist swore that what she was about to do wouldn't hurt anyone. Margaret said she understood everything. After that, Velletta gave her friend a hug. After Margaret left, Velletta was alone in her room. Actually, that wasn't entirely true. There was another man in the room, and he just couldn't figure out what this girl was up to. Velletta thought Margaret was a sweet girl, so she wanted to find a man who could protect her from Luther's harassment. But honestly, she also wanted a little revenge on her brother. She knew the game's storyline inside and out, so after ruling out Noah and Luther, there were only two good male characters left, Prince Kyle Lucius and the leader of the Knights, Graham Cortez. So, if Margaret liked either of them, she would hand them over on a silver platter. But if the girl didn't like either of them, she'd have to come up with another strategy. However, if Margaret wanted, she was perfectly capable of protecting her friend herself. In any case, they needed to start preparing her plans soon. They only had 4 years to make it happen, so she was counting on Austin's help. Velletta said she would give the guy enough work to give his sharp mind a real test. They shook hands and sealed the deal. Roxa and Raheel were hiding in the attic, and Velletta told them they could have as much meat as they wanted as long as they stayed nearby, but they were free to leave any time. For years passed, and Velletta returned to Galen Alley. The girl arrived at a certain place where the young people were waiting for her, thrilled to see her. The protagonist didn't understand why they were waiting for her, since Austin was their leader. She had spent 3 years building this team, selecting the most reliable people and raising funds. But communicating with the team members was Austin's responsibility, even though they always wanted to be with her. Just then, a girl came over and asked her why they were collecting weeds. What she held in her hand was larup, a plant that grew everywhere. Velletta could explain, but these people wouldn't understand, so they just needed to follow her orders. It was time for her to go, but no one wanted her to leave. However, the girl wasn't going to stay a second longer. Margaret was at her desk in the Chamber of Commerce office at Viscount Evans' estate. She reviewed the reports and realized that at this rate, they were about to go bankrupt. Most of their orders came from the Olden family, but even so, they still had to pay a large sum of cash. Her assistant suggested she talk it over with Miss Velletta, who was supposed to come for dinner. Margaret agreed it was a good idea, because every time she saw Velletta, she gained courage and determination. Jill was happy her boss had such a good friend. But they were rudely interrupted because something unexpected had happened. It turned out someone from the Cedar clan had suddenly appeared. The Cedar clan was super mysterious, but their representative was very eager to meet Margaret. This surprised her, especially since her father had pushed the entire meeting onto her. So, Mr. Lucille and Margaret began their conversation. The young man's appearance and his whole demeanor were rather eccentric. He had found out she had snatched something in auction, and one of them was this blue-eyed cat thingy. He begged Margaret to sell the item back to him. He hadn't come empty-handed either. He held a box and said he would give her what was inside. And inside was the amulet of the Cedar clan. On the continent, members of the Sitar clan treasured that stone, considering it the most mystical thing. A century ago, the Emperor of Estia obtained this amulet and ruled the country like a king. It was strange that he would trade it for a shabby cat statue. Margaret was completely confused because she had bought the cat for very little money. She thought that if Lucille was willing to trade such a precious amulet for it, the cat must be very important to him. The girl stood up, walked over to the cat statue, and said she didn't need his amulet. But since he wanted the little statue so badly, she would just give it to him. Seeing the amulet in person and meeting a member of the Cedar clan, that was enough for her. Margaret thought the cat would be better off with the young man, and she told him not to lose the small figurine again. The man realized this girl was extraordinary, truly special, but he still took out the talisman and placed it in Margaret's hand. Lucille grabbed the cat and headed for the exit, saying the girl deserved to have it. Margaret didn't understand what was happening, and he said she would understand everything sooner or later. After he left, he stood there and said this was the last time he would trust this person named Magnus, and then warned him that if he messed up, Lucille would lock him in his own house, never letting him out. Just then, Verita walked past him, and the man thought she was a real weirdo. Margaret getting the talisman was the first event to start the game. The dinner party began, and Verita acted as if she was hearing about all this for the first time. She looked impeccably surprised. It was then that the Marquis's daughter thought her friend was so thoughtful. Then, Margaret held out her hand to show her friend the Tsida family's talisman. She thought it was crazy to carry something so valuable in her pocket, like a pack of matches. The Viscount's daughter thought it was fate, so she accepted the talisman. Verita had mixed feelings because she knew her friend was the only one in the world who deserved to have it. But the crazy thing was, Margaret decided to give the talisman to Verita, The protagonist needed to talk her friend out of it, so she said that if she gave it away, the original giver would be very angry. But if the real Verita were here, she would have snatched that talisman long ago, because she loved gifts the most. After thinking for a moment, Margaret agreed with her friend. Afterward, Verita happily congratulated the Viscount's daughter on her new treasure. The protagonist, on the other hand, knew that her friend's life would change forever now that the stone had appeared. It turned out Jill was working for Verita, and she had only pretended to be surprised, an act Verita appreciated. Moreover, it was she who had hired the former mercenary girl and sent her to the Viscount's daughter. The employee asked her boss when she was going to the branch office, as her deputy wanted to see her. The problem was that work at the branch was piling up, so she had to go. After the dinner party, Verita headed to the branch office. Austin looked terrible, and she noticed he had lost a lot of weight. He said irritably that if that was the case, maybe she should help him with some of the work. She suggested that if it was too hard there, he could transfer her to work at Alden Manor. However, she also knew that if he was calling her over, something must have happened. There were several documents that needed her signature. He had prepared a warehouse to store the Larip, but he was worried they would rot with all the overtime. So if she needed to plant that badly, it would be much easier to just grow it directly. She hadn't thought of that before, but it was the key because Larip was basically a weed, so it didn't need special treatment for trial cultivation. They just needed to buy some soil, which wouldn't even make a dent in their finances. Besides, the Andrew Merchant Guild had been making some suspicious moves lately. Their criminal activities had increased significantly, as was clear from the records. This time, they were involved in some very illegal business, even bribing the border patrol. But they paid us more, so now we have the report in our hands. Verita praised Austin for his quick thinking. She was glad they had met and that Austin was doing all this for her and her shared cause. Most of the time, they didn't do anything too bad, just bribe some people to secure a brighter future for themselves. But the girl knew that if they didn't cut ties with those border guards now, they would be in big trouble. So they would pull back for now and wait for the right moment. These were big issues, so after settling them, our heroine prepared to go home. But as soon as Verita stepped out of Austin's office, all the other employees stared at her. They were happy to see her, but also disappointed that she was leaving right away. Everyone wanted to talk to the female boss privately, so Austin offered to let them use his office. It had been 3 years, and she still couldn't get used to that kind of treatment. Verita was walking home, knowing she might run into some trouble because Luther had tightened his surveillance on her. The girl was worried about her friend, but it wasn't just Luther who was after her. Her entire family was causing her trouble, Luther for threatening Margaret, and her father for any little mistake. Most importantly, Verita knew her family was furious with her for disrupting their business in Ananta. Since that day, the auction house had been a mess, which shook her family's standing among the nobility. She was heading towards an alley when she suddenly found an injured young man lying there. Verita was terrified, thinking the guy was a goner. The girl didn't expect to see a dead body, but the man started showing signs of life. The protagonist was about to call for help, but she knew no one should see her here. The young man told her, for her own good, to just walk past and pretend she saw nothing. In that instant, she recognized who was lying in front of her. It was Noah, one of the villains from the game. She didn't understand what he was doing here, but he knew that since she had recognized him, he had to get rid of her. The man was a very powerful mage, but seeing the color of his blood, she realized he was poisoned. Even so, despite his terrible condition, the guy tried to crack a joke. Verita was at a complete loss, not knowing what to do in this situation. She worried that if she left now, Noah would die. So she opened her inventory and took out an antidote. She took the vial and slid it in front of him. This move of hers caught him completely off guard. For a moment, he thought she was just giving him charity, which angered him. So he asked if the stranger was looking to die. Now, or later, now Verita was terrified. The protagonist told the man that the vial contained an antidote, but she was too scared to get any closer. So she rolled the vial over. After saying that, she turned to leave, but heard his voice say that she pitied him even though she knew who he was, but she denied it. Verita claimed she was just on her way home and wanted to help when she saw a dying man. Noah didn't expect someone to act out of kindness, willing to sacrifice something so precious for a stranger. Then the young man asked where she thought she was going. He told her to stay put if she didn't want her wings broken. But Verita said she couldn't stay on the ground, that she was going to fly to the sky, and suggested he try to find her later. Before Noah could react, Verita had already run out of the alley. She ran as fast as she could, shouting for Rahil. The man appeared before her instantly, swept her into his arms, and they flew away from there at top speed. Rahil thought taking the rooftops was the best way. He knew the girl didn't want Noah to die, and she praised him for not making a move, for not harming the mage. The twins had been following her, and now Rahil said that if that guy had dared to lay a hand on their mistress, he would have charged in. He had sensed Noah's power, so he figured he and Roxanne could have taken him on together. This was Verita and Noah's first meeting, and she hoped it would be the last, as it could be big trouble. The game system sent her a message, saying she could see the end of the man's life. The girl had no idea what this new route was, or what the hidden ending actually meant. She never thought that the new route she learned about 3 years ago would turn out to be Noah's. The thought threw her mind into chaos, while the twins were completely confused. They were worried because Verita had been normal before, and then suddenly became very strange. Roxanne almost thought their mistress was dying. She had spent 3 years trying to get a happy ending in the game. But as soon as the main story began, Noah appeared. Verita didn't know what the right thing to do was, while the twins were already plotting to get rid of the mage. The girl went and hugged them, because even if she had done everything for Noah's route, she didn't regret saving them. In his study, Noah was listening to his servant's report. It turned out the person had a very expensive bottle of antidote, and the servant suggested he take a sip. The young man didn't trust strangers, but as soon as he heard it was medicine, he immediately drank the whole bottle. Well, almost all of it, because the little bit left was proof that not everyone wanted him dead. Since the antidote was top grade, only 3 families could produce it: the Andra family, the Alden family, and the Brem family. Noah didn't expect to hear the name Alden, but it was interesting, very interesting. The servant was supposed to investigate the Alden family and tell someone, but the latter part proved to be a big hassle. The servant was eloquent, but the master was still very frustrated. Now, more than anything, Noah wanted to know who the girl in the alley was. However, a challenge like this only fueled his fighting spirit. Meanwhile, at Alden Manor, Luther was pacing his room like a caged animal, muttering to himself. He was excited about the information he had just received, as it meant Margaret could finally be his. His spy reported that a representative from the Tsidov family had visited the girl, and what's more, the visitor had given her a talisman. Luther knew Verita had visited Margaret, that they had dinner and talked about future husband candidates. But this visit was different. He believed that now that Margaret had the talisman, Carlos would greenlight their marriage. The old man was already waiting for his son in the study, but he wasn't exactly thrilled to chat with the boy. Then, the news came. Margaret had somehow gotten her hands on the Tsidov family's talisman. This sobered the man up instantly. Carlos couldn't believe what he was hearing, but his son was just relaying his spy's report. What's more, Luther added that Verita knew about the whole thing too. The old man was angry, but getting that talisman was more important than punishing his daughter. Then Luther suggested to the head of the family that they should make Margaret part of the family through marriage. The man promised to think about it and dismissed his son for the time being. As soon as the boy was gone, the father sighed, thinking what a fool his son was. Yes, the talisman was precious to Carlos, but he didn't think it was reason enough to make Margaret the wife of his direct heir. So his plan was simple: just take the thing from the girl and be done with it. He called a servant and told him to prepare the carriage. Carlos arrived at the palace and requested an audience with the king. He knew it was quite bold to show up unannounced, but the king wasn't angry. He was expecting good news. Orlando was curious about what news the Marquis had brought him. The news did indeed shock the king, as it concerned the Tsidov family's heirloom. Apparently, the old Alden wanted to offer the precious treasure to his majesty. Meanwhile, Verita came to visit Margaret. Margaret found her friend growing more beautiful by the day. But this time, the girl's little trick didn't get the reaction she wanted. Her reaction was a bit strange, which surprised the protagonist. Meanwhile, Viscount Ebanan was pacing in the merchant guild, looking very stressed. That was the sight the girls saw when they arrived and stepped out of the carriage. The man was in a hurry to talk to his daughter, so he immediately invited her to his study for a chat. He also asked Verita to join the conversation. Margaret had received an invitation from the Imperial palace. Since the letter was addressed to him, he read it and found out the court already knew she had the talisman. However, Verita sensed there was more to the letter and wanted to know what it was. They were inviting the owner of the talisman, and a carriage would come to pick her up at the appointed time. The letter also said that they hoped no one would get bitten by a viper while trying to escape. Verita realized her father knew about the talisman. This meant Margaret had to accept the invitation to the palace, as there was no getting out of it this time. Basically, Margaret had to choose between a rock and a hard place, so the choice was very obvious. 2 days later, the girls arrived at the Imperial Palace. Margaret was overwhelmed by all the wealth and luxury. At that moment, the Viscount's daughter started to get very anxious, but Verita was sure she could handle it. Her friend was just afraid of messing up. When talking to the prince, the Marquis's daughter was sure her friend had done nothing wrong, so she could say whatever she wanted. Verita was sure her friend should do and say what was in her heart. These words filled Margaret's heart with new confidence. Verita decided to wait for her friend in the cafe. She knew that if things went well, she would be incredibly busy in the game. The prince wasn't a villain, but the developers didn't know what kind of person he would be either. In the game, she didn't want Margaret to become the prince's wicked witch. She wanted her to be the one and only female lead. Verita planned to do whatever her friend wanted. Margaret understood that if she showed any weakness, they would eat her alive. As soon as she entered the room, Prince Kyle greeted her politely. After meeting the prince, Margaret went to the cafe to meet Verita. She had really enjoyed the tea and cookies at the reception, so she wanted her friend to try them too. That being the case, Verita promised they would go to the reception together next time. But before we could talk any further, the Marquis's daughter started to take something out of a small bag. It was a magical device used to set up a barrier so no one could eavesdrop on them. Margaret had never seen anything like it before, but made sense as this conversation was important and must not be overheard. Verita was curious what her friend thought of the prince. At first, the girl was really nervous because Kyle looked like a predator, but after a while, he started acting like a cat with a mouse, just playing with it. Surprisingly, her friend managed to see right through the prince. But the big question was whether she liked him. Margaret said she would have felt bad if the mouse was decent, but this mouse was a real bad guy, so she was all for it. On top of that, Kyle was planning to set a trap for Marquis Alden. Margaret had many thoughts about this and was worried for her friend, but decided to follow her gut. So Margaret decided to stand up for her best friend. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the cafe started to get tense. Noah walked in and immediately became the center of attention, but he assured the cafe owner that he just wanted to be quiet at a table. His presence was a huge problem for the Marquis's daughter. One question kept ringing in her head. What was he doing here? The waiter offered to show him to an empty table, but for some reason, the guy refused. He had his eye on a spot, and with just one glare at the customer, the person jumped up and ran, saying he was done. He took the newly vacant seat and started staring at Verita with a murderous gaze. After thinking for a moment, the girl realized this was no coincidence. Noah ignored the barrier and told the girls to continue their conversation. Verita knew it was too risky to continue talking with an archmage nearby. The man pointed out that the device was a new design and that he had never seen anything like it. He didn't know of any magical item like that, so he hoped the girls would speak clearly for him. Verita was annoyed that he figured out what it was with just one look, so she had to turn it off and start talking to Noah directly. However, the guy knew full well he had just seen a rare and valuable item, so he really wanted to get a closer look. This was a problem because Margaret had said she stole it, but she had actually invented it with Oscar. Margaret suddenly cut in, claiming her family had only recently invented the item. The Viscount's daughter had lied to a duke for Verita's sake, which moved her deeply. Noah apologized for his prying, but he wasn't truly sorry, just waiting for the grand unveiling of the device. He met Verita's eyes and told her he was leaving so the ladies could continue their conversation. Verita noticed the guy was checking her out, and he wasn't trying to hide at all. This made her think he recognized her, but she couldn't figure out how, so she decided to eat a piece of chocolate, when suddenly her hand slipped and the chocolate landed right at the young man's feet. Just like when she threw the vial, they both had a strong sense of déjà vu. Verita just couldn't understand why even a piece of candy was against her. The protagonist was relaxing in her room, laughing. She was so happy that as soon as the news reached her brother's ears, he headed straight for the palace. It seemed all her hard work over the past 3 years was finally paying off. The twins told her to stop her brother, but she said she was planning on a showdown anyway. Verita didn't want to make the storyline any worse, so she decided to go with the flow. The girl thought that if Carlos really went to the palace, it would be a wonderful twist. She had countless reasons to mess with her father's business, like not wanting any more innocent people to get hurt by his shady dealings. Meanwhile, the king was scratching his head over the appearance of the Tsida family's talisman, because it was too suspicious. Just then, the prince entered the room. The guy was on top of everything, as he had been tracking the Alden family's every move. He reminded his father that if he didn't get rid of them now, he would do it in the future. Kyle also believed that the talisman most likely came from the family of Viscount Abanan. The guy knew so much about the Alden family only because he dreamed of sending them straight to the depths of hell. The king understood his son's wishes, but claimed the Alden family was necessary for the empire. But that wasn't true, only he needed them. So he turned a blind eye to the matter of Ananta, but Kyle planned to shut that auction house down. That's why Kyle didn't want to give the Alden family a trade monopoly, as that would be bad news for him. Furthermore, the prince planned to leave the talisman with the person who received it. He intended to find out everything about the talisman and then act. The king agreed, but warned that if his son messed up, he would take back all the authority he had given him. But Kyle was more confident in his abilities than ever. Verita desperately wanted to get close to the prince, so she decided to help her friend pick an outfit for her appointment. She took her friend to the most famous dress shop in the capital. Margaret didn't expect this, and Verita was about to buy her friend some new clothes. The clerk immediately approached them and asked what kind of outfit they were looking for. But the Marquis's daughter couldn't find anything suitable in the catalog and asked for a custom design. She picked a dress she liked for herself and wanted to have a custom outfit made for her friend. Margaret was very surprised by this gesture. Verita wouldn't listen to any objections and had already gone to pick out the fabric. Margaret didn't understand why her friend had suddenly decided to gift her a dress. The Marquis's daughter insisted that it brought her great joy, and she never thought her friend would try to take that joy away. Margaret was speechless and just hugged her friend. On the other hand, Verita asked the shop owner to show her all the materials needed to make the dress. The girls finished their business at the shop, but Margaret was worried her friend had spent too much money on her. The Marquis's daughter couldn't believe her friend was sad because she bought her clothes, and the Viscount's daughter started to protest. Margaret was worried about her friend buying her such a fancy dress. She wanted to pay for it herself and put on her sweetest expression to get her friend to agree, but she wouldn't budge. During tea with the prince, Kyle admitted he had thought Viscount Abanan was the owner of the talisman, so he was surprised to learn it belonged to his daughter. Margaret wasn't surprised the prince thought so, while he thought she was quite humble. Kyle knew the Alden family was backing the Abanan family, and that the girl was close to Verita of the Alden family. He wasn't going to just take her word that she owned the talisman, so he needed proof. The problem was she couldn't prove it either, as it had neither her name nor any markings on it. The prince was stunned, and the girl continued, saying she wasn't the only one who could touch the talisman, so she didn't know how to prove it was hers. Kyle didn't understand how she could ask such a question. He didn't expect her to come without thinking this through. Margaret felt that just showing up was enough. For a moment, the prince was even embarrassed to have brought it up, so he was curious how she got the talisman in the first place. Margaret thought it was best to omit the part about the cat, so she just said that one day someone from the Tsida family came to her, gave her the talisman, and she added that the person said she deserved to be its owner. The prince wanted to see the talisman if she had brought it, so she took the item out. Kyle was surprised she would carry something so valuable in her pocket. She didn't find it strange. Weren't pockets for carrying things? His Highness facepalmed, thinking that only someone with that kind of personality could own such a talisman. After that, the young man asked the girl if she would be willing to give the item to someone else. For example, to Marquis Alden? This really took Margaret by surprise. After all, Marquis Alden had promised to offer the talisman to the Emperor in exchange for a monopoly on a magic item trade. So the prince wanted to know if she wanted to help Marquis Alden climb the social ladder. He wondered what would happen if he mentioned Verita, so he asked if she would sacrifice the talisman for her friend. At that moment, she remembered her friend's words and decided to follow her gut. So, the answer to the prince's question was a firm no. After all, she was the owner of the talisman, so she would decide how to use it from now on. This meant Marquis Alden had absolutely no right to tell her what to do with her things. Kyle definitely didn't expect that answer. Margaret knew that no matter what she decided, Verita would support her, because that's what friends do. Now he understood that it was her friend who was empowering this girl, giving her the strength to do what she wanted. He couldn't figure out how such a sweet and innocent girl could be friends with the daughter of the Alden family. Still, the prince appreciated the choice his companion had made. After that, Kyle asked Margaret if she would help him set a little trap for Marquis Alden. Back at the cafe, Verita was waiting for a friend, worried sick about her. Finally, she saw the carriage stop and Margaret get out. People noticed the Imperial carriage and the beautiful girl they hadn't seen before. Margaret smiled and walked into the cafe, looking around for a friend. At that very moment, Noah was sitting in his own carriage. Suddenly, he barked an order at his coachman to stop the carriage near the cafe. He had spotted Verita and realized he suddenly had business to attend to there. In the cafe, as they were talking, a piece of chocolate fell at Noah's feet. It was exactly the same as what happened in the alley. Noah mentioned that something similar had happened in an alley a few days ago. The girl knelt down and started to pick up the treat, apologizing to the Duke. The guy actually bent down himself, picked up the chocolate, and said a lady shouldn't be doing that, although it was no big deal to her. The first time it happened, he was angry. The second time made him smile, but he wondered if it would be a third time. Verita just pretended she had no idea what he was talking about. He said nothing to that, only that he had a pleasant day. Honestly, Noah hoped they would meet again. Unfortunately, the girl wasn't too keen on the idea. After the Duke left, Verita slumped down at the table. Her mood completely soured, and she cursed the mage. Just then, a waitress approached them and said she had forgotten about the protective barrier, so she needed to be more careful. Jerome knew everyone around was thinking the same thing, just not saying it out loud, so she needed to watch what she said. She knew that guy was trying to protect her from being discovered by the Duke, so it was best he didn't let the Duke see him again. The strange thing was that Noah would take any interest in her at all. This was completely unexpected, so Velletta was taken aback. There was no reason for the Duke to do that or feel that way. It occurred to her that he might just be doing it because he generally hated people from the Alden family. Still, she felt it was better for Noah to pester her than Margaret. She had Jerome dig up more information and rumors. It turned out that the prince was hosting a ball and planned to announce her, Margaret, as the new master of the sigil at the event. This was to keep Carlos in check. So many nobles would be gossiping in this cafe, making it a gold mine of information. That being said, Velletta was getting ready to go out. Jerome was confused because they were all desperately earning money for Velletta, yet she was paying for her own tea. Most importantly, Jerome had told everyone she was his mistress, which thrilled her. After that, the guy kissed her hand, just as she wanted. Because of these rumors, they could talk in the cafe for a long time. So he had to play the part to the end. Velletta got into the carriage, saying Jerome did a good job today. Before leaving, she told him to notify her if Noah showed up at the cafe again. After that, she went home. The guy watched her leave, realizing something was off. At home, Carlos called his daughter in and began to scold her for not telling him about the talisman. Luther also sided with his father, telling his sister not to lie to him. They wanted to know why Margaret had met with the prince a few days ago. The girl guessed that this interrogation was triggered by the news of the royal ball. So she played dumb, acting as if she didn't understand what was so precious about the talisman, since their family was already very wealthy anyway. This enraged her father, who began to curse his own daughter. Velletta said that even if she didn't know the talisman's value, she didn't know why the prince wanted to see Margaret. The point was, Margaret was the master of the talisman, which completely disrupted her father's plans. Then she added that at the reception, the prince would announce the matter concerning Margaret to everyone. And about the talisman. Seeing the furious expressions on her father and brother's faces as they realized their plan was ruined, the girl rejoiced inwardly. With 10 days until the ball, Velletta had a lot to do. She was going to make Margaret's debut legendary. 10 days passed, and the day of the palace reception arrived. Velletta and the Viscount were waiting for Margaret to appear. The girl looked gorgeous in a rose-toned gown. The outfit highlighted her beauty and hair color, making her shine even brighter, while the red shoes were the finishing touch. This design was originally part of the game, but it looked even more captivating in reality. Just then, Margaret's mother came out and thanked Velletta for giving her daughter such a gift. Marquise Bowden was delighted to see her daughter in such a beautiful dress. The Viscount even shed tears, as he had been worried his daughter wouldn't have a proper gown for the event, but Velletta had arranged everything. After the pleasantries, the girls decided to head to the ball early. Velletta hoped tonight would be the best night of her friend's life. But the journey was not smooth, and they hadn't gone far before they were ambushed by bandits. Goodness, the bumps were something else, and Margaret and her parents were terrified. The protagonist told them to think on the bright side, as she knew they would be fine. She also told them to close the windows and draw the curtains. In the game story, the carriage was attacked, most likely by Carlos trying to steal the talisman. Velletta knew this would happen, so she had warned the twins and the coachman. Although she was well prepared for this, she was still sweating with nervousness. The coachman warned them that he would try to break through the bandits, so the ride might get bumpy. She saw the fighting and truly hoped the twins had appeared. Unfortunately, she couldn't fully relax, but she was really hoping for the best. But as luck would have it, a system prompt popped up. Complete this quest, and she would gain the prince's support. Mess it up, and she was dead. Velletta knew from the start that this quest was make or break. The girl didn't see herself as the protagonist, so dying was absolutely not an option. But she also knew that if the bandits won, they would kill all the witnesses. The twins had already dealt with the bandits, but the real question was, did they know about the insignia? Could they find it? Probably not, which meant she needed to find a way to get a message to them to find the thing. They finally arrived at the palace. Velletta could see that the entire Abaddon family was exhausted. After the bumpy ride, the coachman gave her a signal. There were two waves of attacks. The prince's men fought off one, and the twins fought off the other. This information greatly shocked the protagonist. Afterward, she had the coachman tell the twins to look for clues to identify the attackers. Velletta knew that since the prince had sent people to protect her friend, his stance was clear. The girl also understood that the prince was interested in her friend, which meant she was no longer in danger of being killed or kidnapped by Luther. Now Noah's target was her, but the commander of the knights would likely be at the ball as well. This was no time to fall apart, so Velletta decided to pull herself together. Afterward, she turned to Margaret and suggested they go inside the palace. There were already many guests inside. Margaret had never attended an event like this before, so she shrank back a little, feeling anxious. Seeing this, Velletta suggested her friend think of something fun, and if that didn't work, to imagine the prince as a cat chasing a snake around the castle. The image helped Margaret shake off her nervousness and feel much more at ease. The gathered nobles had never seen the Viscount's daughter before, so they thought she was some princess. Velletta was satisfied, as she had already achieved her first goal for the day. She had designed a supporting role for herself and decided to do everything possible to help her friend, like getting her a drink. Everything should have gone smoothly, but then Luther appeared. Margaret greeted him and said that thanks to his sister, she was able to arrive safely. After that, she asked him not to call her by her first name, as they were not close friends. The words were hurtful. It was an insult that infuriated Luther. Velletta was glad her friend showed some backbone and embarrassed Luther. Afterward, she told her brother that their journey here had been quite an ordeal. She said their carriage almost overturned, and the guy couldn't believe what he was hearing. Still, she thought that if she hadn't been there, Margaret would have been so scared she would have destroyed the carriage. Then, as if nothing had happened, she mentioned that their father had been terribly busy lately. Carlos wasn't just tired. At that moment, he was absolutely furious. Just then, the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of the emperor and empress. The royal couple entered with composure and dignity. The emperor thanked everyone for attending the ball. Then he announced that something very important had recently happened in the empire. Hearing this, the Viscount's daughter squeezed her friend's hand, because for the first time in 100 years, the cedar talisman had found its new master somewhere in the empire. So he wanted to introduce the master of the talisman to everyone. Margaret froze, extremely nervous. Velletta told her to imagine a cat punching a snake in the head. This helped the girl pull herself together. Margaret was ready to face the crowd, even though Luther tried to stop her. But his sister grabbed his shoulder, telling him to stay put and not interfere, because she knew full well that he was the one who had orchestrated the attack on her friend. Margaret didn't know about it yet, and if he wanted to keep it a secret, he had better behave. The words stung the guy, and he immediately slipped away, as there was nothing he could do at that moment. Luther's problem was that he hadn't bothered to win the girl's heart, so he ended up looking like a fool. Just then, Cal walked up to Margaret. The man looked her straight in the eye and said that she was the new guardian of the talisman. The Viscount's daughter curtsied to his highness. Afterward, Margaret thanked Velletta for everything she had done to help her succeed. The daughter of Marquis Alden didn't feel she had done anything special. Just then, Luther came over and asked how long the girls were going to stick together, since Margaret didn't have a partner for the night. He offered to be her partner, all the while watching his sister's reaction to the proposal. Just then, the prince came over and said that Margaret could honor him with a dance. The prince didn't want to be rude, but he wasn't about to let someone from the Alden family have the first dance with her. So he didn't hesitate to offer the girl his hand and ask her to dance. Margaret looked flustered at the prince's hand. Then she smiled and said it would be her honor to give His Highness the first dance. The two began to dance in the center of the hall. The people around them were all talking, saying they were a match made in heaven. Velletta and Luther also watched them intently, but his sister told him to wipe that look off his face. She was thrilled that her plan was finally working, but her brother was seething with rage. The protagonist knew the prince wouldn't snatch the sigil from her friend, but he also wouldn't stand by if someone else tried to. Luther understood his sister's hint perfectly and told her to shut up. Everyone in the Empire knew that the ruling family's power came from that sigil, so the Emperor wouldn't mind a marriage between the two. And just like that, the guy snapped, punching his sister in the face and knocking her to the ground. He hit her so hard that the corner of her mouth started to bleed. Velletta was relieved that her friend hadn't seen it. No matter how much it hurt, she got up and told her brother that he was only humiliating himself by causing a scene in a place like this. But Velletta wasn't going to let it go and decided to tell her brother something that would really hit him where it hurts. It turned out that both Carlos and Luther had tried to snatch Margaret's sigil and failed, which meant the Marquis wouldn't let his son marry her. On top of that, Luther hadn't thought things through and had actually pushed the girl he liked right into the prince's arms. After saying her piece, Velletta went out onto the balcony where she was alone. To be honest, that blow really hurt, but she pressed an enchanted handkerchief to the wound to ease the pain. She was so lost in cursing her brother that she didn't notice another person step out onto the balcony. She was wishing all sorts of nasty things on Luther when she suddenly heard a chuckle behind her. She turned around to see a man who apologized for not being able to hold back his laughter. Velletta recognized him as Graham Curtis, the commander of the Knights. He then apologized for startling her. The guy admitted he was worried about her and had followed her out, only to happen to overhear, which he felt was improper. Graham was very polite and handsome, and it wasn't his fault. It was just that she couldn't retort to her brother the way she wanted in front of the guests. Most importantly, the young man asked how she was feeling, but the girl was fine, as she always carried a tube of the right potion with her. Graham was surprised by this, then asked if she wasn't scared living in a family like that. Velletta smiled and said that things were getting better now, adding in her mind, thanks to the twins and the others. The knight was amazed by her resilience, that she could still smile after being treated so horribly. Then he asked if she already had a dance partner. She said no, and Graham invited her to dance. Velletta was torn because deep down, she had already said yes 100 times. But she still refused his invitation to dance, because he was one of only 2 decent men in the entire setting and was supposed to be with Margaret. Then she added that she was feeling dizzy. Just then, Noah appeared on the balcony, saying that if that was the case, she needed to rest. Velletta suddenly realized she had been set up because he wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't the first time Noah had appeared out of nowhere, either. And what's more, Graham and Noah clearly couldn't stand each other. The girl suddenly remembered that the knight disliked both the Owl clan and the Snake clan. But if they were going to fight here, it was better if she didn't watch. So Velletta decided to slip away to get as far away from them as possible. The magician tried to be polite, saying she didn't need to curtsy if she was dizzy. Somehow, his words and smile flustered the protagonist. His sudden kindness even scared her a little, but she tried to remain composed. She apologized for her weakness, saying she did need to rest a bit. Just then, the knight took her hand and asked how she was feeling. Graham was worried she might faint, so he offered to escort her to the lounge. Velletta held her ground, as she didn't want things to go this way. But the Duke made the final call, insisting on taking her to her room since she looked unwell. Because in Noah's opinion, a noble knight like Graham shouldn't be chasing women, but protecting the place from bad guys. The moment Noah began to cast a spell, the knight reminded him that using magic was forbidden in the palace. The Duke wasn't scared at all. He just suggested reporting it to the Emperor, but warned that it wouldn't hurt him, but would harm the knight instead. The tension between the 2 men grew with every second, and then they started insulting each other, with Velletta stuck between them, unable to move. With every passing second, she realized she needed to get out of there, but they wouldn't let her go. Just then, Noah noticed her growing fear. He felt that all this macho talk was only making the lady more nervous when she was already not feeling well. So he offered her his arm to make sure she got to the lounge. No more drama. After the Duke had spoken, she had no more excuses to get away from him. So she sighed, took the magician's arm, and left the balcony with him. However, Graham stopped her, saying he hoped her wound would heal soon. He kissed her hand, hoping she would feel much better. The next time they met, Velletta was genuinely touched, and she assured the young man that they would definitely meet again. Even so, she ended up leaving with Noah. They walked in complete silence through the castle corridors. Velletta didn't know how to act, because she returned to the hall with Noah and everyone was staring at them. Her father was also glaring at his daughter with a vicious look. Yes, she didn't want Carlos to see her, but he did, and he was furious. So she told the Duke that she could find her way to the room on her own now. The young man noticed traces of magic on her cheek, which meant she had drunk a healing potion, but the wound hadn't fully healed, which he could. Velletta intended to deal with it herself after she got home, so she didn't want to bother the Duke now. Just then, the guy smirked and threw her own words from the alley back at her. The girl didn't deny helping him, but she wasn't in a hurry to accept any thanks either. The way she had spoken that day had caught him off guard, as he hadn't heard words like that in a long time. Velletta pretended not to know what he was talking about, saying she was just trying to save a stranger's life. However, the guy didn't believe she didn't know who she was saving. The thing was, he had a feeling he hadn't left her mind since that encounter. He was curious to see when the girl would realize that she was his one and only benefactor. But Velletta couldn't believe Noah would be a benefactor to anyone. So his behavior baffled her, and she asked if he didn't know that all snakes were poisonous. The Duke wondered if she would attack now, or if that was why she had run away back then. At that, he touched her lips, asking her to show him what kind of poison was hidden there. He would give anything for it. But just as things were getting interesting, a girl interrupted them. It was Natalie Alden, Velletta's stepsister. Although Carlos didn't acknowledge Natalie as his direct descendant, she was the only one allowed to live in their family estate. The stepsister had earned her place with her exceptional talent, and she was also a master of swordsmanship. On one hand, Velletta should have been relieved by her sister's appearance, but something felt off. It was the unusual expression on Natalie's face. The girl looked at them and asked if she was interrupting something. Her sister concluded they were on a date, which surprised the protagonist. Velletta couldn't believe someone thought she and Noah were a couple, but he acted as if he was disappointed to be interrupted. I mean, the Duke wished they could have enjoyed their little secret date a while longer. The protagonist was starting to get angry at the magician's audacity. Then, she suddenly felt Noah begin to heal her wound with magic. All the pain and nasty after effects from Luther's punch disappeared. Then Noah said with a straight face that since she had helped him once, he would take care of Luther for her, for free. Then he leaned down and kissed her hand. The girl had expected many things, but definitely not this. After doing so, Noah turned and walked away, leaving the heroine alone with her sister. As soon as they were alone, Natalie started gushing about the Duke's behavior, saying he was usually so scary and cold, but this time he was amazing. The sister apologized for possibly interrupting their date. It wasn't like that, and Velletta told the girl to give her a break. Still, Natalie was convinced the Duke was interested in her sister. The protagonist sighed. She felt the guy had his own reasons for acting that way. Natalie said she wouldn't tell their father anything, since he hated magicians. The girl suddenly remembered running into the Duke near their mansion when she was returning home recently. He usually ignored her, but this time he actually spoke to her. They exchanged a few words, but the man seemed really frustrated. Velletta didn't know what to make of his behavior, so she asked him to escort her sister to the lounge, as she was feeling unwell. The problem was if Noah kept acting like this, he would cause a lot of trouble when he took over the family. Just then, a system notification popped up in front of the protagonist. What she just read took her by surprise. Just then, the prince walked up to Graham. Kyle felt sorry for the ladies at the ball, as the knight hadn't been on the dance floor once. But Graham couldn't dance. His duty was to protect his majesty. Still, the prince thought his friend was a rather skilled knight. The problem was that Graham had been rejected, and the prince guessed he had asked a man to dance. The knight smirked and asked if there couldn't be another reason. A reason for being rejected. Meanwhile, Velletta reached the lounge and collapsed onto a sofa. Her head was pounding, and she felt like she was going to die from all this. It turned out she had attracted a bit too much of the knight's attention, which could open up a completely different scenario. Velletta couldn't understand how or why this had happened. Dancing was just an excuse to talk, and the prince had happened to forget to tell his friend that. Kyle called Graham over because he wanted to introduce him to someone. Just then, Margaret walked up to them. This was Margaret Ebenine, the new guardian of the talisman. The prince introduced his friends, and the girl curtsied, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Graham bowed and said he was glad she was the new guardian of the talisman. The prince asked his friend and the girl to become friends, as they would be seeing each other often. Because the guardian of the talisman would never be safe, he said, glancing at Luther and Carlos, who were glaring at them. Graham also understood that some people were too greedy to let things go. The knight knew the Alden family liked to bully the weak and take advantage of them, but Margaret wasn't offended by his words. The girl felt safe because she knew her friends had her back. Kyle realized she was talking about her mysterious friend again, the one she mentioned when they first met. Just then, he suggested Margaret introduce him to her friend, since she was also here at the party. The problem was, she hadn't seen her for a while, and guessed she might be on the balcony, but the knight already knew who they were talking about. So he asked if her friend happened to be from the Alden family, which Margaret confirmed. The young man said he had run into Velletta, and she was on her way to the lounge to rest for a bit, because she was exhausted. Just then, it dawned on the prince that Lady Alden might have rejected his Graham's invitation to dance. The knight knew there were some rumors about Velletta, that she was a fool who always caused trouble. He couldn't believe that the lovely girl on the balcony was Lady Alden. At that moment, he thought he probably shouldn't have left her alone with the Duke. Velletta left the lounge, but she still felt terrible. She arrived at the branch, where the staff greeted her, eager to hear the details of what happened. But she felt too awful to talk about anything for the moment. She went into her office, collapsed on the floor, and screamed about what her life had become. She couldn't understand why she couldn't just get some peace. But Austin was convinced it was karma. If he saw it that way and thought she deserved it, then maybe it was fair to dock his pay. Austin started whining and even offered to call a doctor, but she realized what a great actor he was. She lay down on the sofa and started to wonder why Graham's ending had unlocked for her. Noah still made sense. They had formed a connection before Noah even met Margaret. She suddenly looked at Austin and asked if many people had tried to hire him. 3 years ago, a lot of people wanted him back then, but the kid chose her because the job was cool and the pay was ridiculously high. It turned out that the person who offered him the job had connections to the commander of the Knights, but the pay was too low, so he turned it down. Now Velletta understood why Graham had reacted to her that way. She had basically set everything up 3 years ago. Besides, what's done is done, and she now had the twins and Austin on her side. The guy had no idea what was happening to the girl. She just assured him that Margaret's debut was a success and nothing else mattered. But she was worried about the twins, and then with a pop, they appeared out of thin air. The siblings said the mission was a piece of cake, but they were starving. Velletta praised their work and asked if they were hurt. They said they were fine, and the girl thanked them again for saving her life. But then it turned out that the twins hadn't found the insignia mentioned in the quest. Suddenly, a red system alert popped up. It said she had failed the quest and would not receive the prince's protection as a reward. The situation was worse than that because the penalty for failing the quest was, well, not something good. Velletta didn't want to believe she would face such a consequence, but the game gave her one last chance. She had to make a deal with the prince, or she was done for. The twins promised they would go back to the scene and look for the insignia again if it was that important to her. But there was no point, as Carlos had probably erased his tracks completely. Austin also didn't understand why exactly she needed proof of her father's guilt, because even if she and the prince both knew Carlos was behind it, they couldn't do anything without evidence. There was a chance that Kyle had found the insignia himself, but he wouldn't let it slip. Velletta knew there was no use for regrets, so she was thinking of a way to win the prince's trust. Austin also knew that they had been messing with old Alden's plans for 3 years, but it wasn't enough. They needed to get on good terms with the royal family, and they had another way to do it. The protagonist was immediately curious about what her companion meant. Since Carlos's insignia was on that insignia, they needed to tackle the problem at its source. They used special materials to make those insignias, along with the blood of a family member, and as a direct heir of the Alden family, the girl had access to that information. This news made Velletta ecstatic. The girl understood that even a small piece of the badge would be enough, and she would find all the materials. All the man had to do was remind the artisan to thank him for the idea. The girl patted the man's head, but what he wouldn't like was that Velletta had to make a slight adjustment to their original plan. Austen started to get angry, but she explained that they had no other choice. She had originally wanted to set Graham up with Margaret, but circumstances had changed. The guy guessed that the knight had taken a liking to Velletta instead. She didn't deny it and was pleased that her colleague was so quick on the uptake. However, it wasn't just about Graham, because Noah had also fallen head over heels for her. Austen was furious because all his efforts had gone down the drain, but he could only accept reality, so he asked Velletta how much she had changed the original plan. The protagonist was happy that the prince was actually interested in Margaret, as he was the perfect husband for her. The Duke and the Knight wouldn't seriously consider a girl as a dating partner, but she wasn't happy about getting involved with them either, so she planned to deal with this mess later. To outsiders, it would just look like these men were pursuing her. Velletta bluntly admitted that she had deliberately prevented the Duke and Margaret from meeting. Austen suddenly understood that she needed the abilities of the Duke and the Knight. He doesn't know why yet. Velletta knew she was destined to die at the end of the game, and the guy's abilities would come in handy then. As she was about to leave, Austen had the twins keep an eye on her to make sure she didn't do anything else crazy. Roxana and Raheel also agreed that their mistress did have a habit of acting impulsively without thinking. Then it suddenly occurred to her that maybe she shouldn't have mentioned being slapped by her brother. She wanted to handle it herself, but she knew that endless pain awaited her. Back home, her father demanded she confess, threatening to take her life if she didn't tell the truth. This time, he even held a sword to her throat, and she knew she could no longer hide everything. Carlos was enraged because he thought his daughter was having an affair with Noah. To be honest, this surprised her greatly. She shouted, wondering where her father had gotten this information. Carlos had seen his daughter leaving the hall arm in arm with the Duke, but Velletta thought he was completely mistaken. If that wasn't the case, her father wondered what his daughter and Noah were doing. The girl said the man had asked her some strange questions that had really scared her at the time. She added that the man had asked about the twins and the affairs of the Ananta family. Carlos trembled with anger, as he felt the owl's representative was meddling in things that didn't concern him. Velletta continued to play the innocent maiden, asking if this was all related to the family business. But Carlos still demanded his daughter tell him everything about what Margaret and the prince had talked about. She said the prince wanted to know Margaret's wish because he wanted to help her achieve it and strengthen her protection. But her father didn't believe her and pressed the sword against her throat. Velletta was at her wit's end, because even if she swore she knew nothing, her father wouldn't believe her. Blood was already trickling from her neck, and she knew her old man might actually kill her this time. Just then, a servant burst in, saying something had happened. Carlos was furious that his father-daughter time with his daughter had been interrupted, but the servant reported that someone had broken into Ananta again. The girl suddenly guessed that this was most likely Austen's doing, pulling the strings behind the scenes. The old man of the Olden family was furious. He couldn't understand how this crap had happened again, and why those scumbags hadn't been caught and dealt with yet. Afterwards, their father left, leaving the daughter and son alone in the room. Velletta apologized to her brother for not having died just now. She told Luther that he needed to get a grip and hurry after their father. The protagonist also said that the Duke wouldn't mind causing trouble for Ananta, and it was likely happening right now. After she finished speaking, Luther ran out after their old man. Velletta felt exhausted, and just then her maid, Lucy, ran to her. The protagonist told Lucy she was fine, and then the twins appeared behind her. She had her siblings inform Austen that their father and Luther had gone to Ananta to handle things. Lucy, however, didn't understand why her young lady felt sorry for her brother and father. The maid gave Velletta, and Austen was right. You've finally gone mad. Look. So they helped our protagonist to bed to lie down. Raheel and Roxana looked very worried, and Velletta tried to tell them she was really okay. Lucy tucked her young lady in, but didn't believe her words, especially after what she had been through. The maid was in awe of her mistress. She was so amazing when she bravely stood up to those two monsters. The protagonist closed her eyes and said that all her allies would soon be able to leave this place. The twins believed that would only happen after they had dealt with all her enemies. Velletta patted Raheel's head and said they would be free when they had stripped the bad guys of everything they had. Afterwards, the twins lay down beside her, and she told them they needed to get some sleep. Lucy turned off the light, and the three of them gradually fell asleep. The protagonist's past life had been a complete nightmare. She was always being yelled at. Even those closest to her betrayed her, like her own brother who blamed her for stealing a cookie. She tried to explain, but no one listened to her excuses. Because of that minor transgression, the old woman canceled her dinner with the boy. She grew up in an orphanage where the children were intimidated, beaten, and scolded, never receiving any love or kindness. School was just as bad, with other students constantly bullying her. She knew how terrible it all was, but there was nothing she could do about it. Eventually, she got used to it all, feeling grateful only for the pocket money the orphanage director gave her. She often watched other children play together and make friends, wishing she could have a life like that too. But one day, on a whim, she decided to go to an internet cafe. This impulsive decision completely turned her life upside down. Because on that day, a door to a whole new world opened for her, a world where even someone like her could have dreams. So as soon as she graduated, she went to work for a company that made video games. But the reality of the job was far from what she had imagined. Her boss was always finding fault with her, saying her project was worthless. He was unwilling to give her project more funding and was convinced it would fail miserably or not even sell at all. No matter how hard she tried to explain that the budget was ridiculously small, no one listened. The boss demanded she finish the job with the existing budget or pay for it out of her own pocket. Working under that kind of pressure was brutal, and it was impossible to meet all the boss's demands. Moreover, the other female colleagues would go out for drinks together after work, but they never invited her. Whenever she asked them to work overtime with her, they always found an excuse to slip away. The protagonist just silently endured their clumsy lies and said nothing to her colleagues. They talked badly about her behind her back and gossiped about her. But then a member of the team, a young guy, decided to help her finish the project. He felt that two heads were better than one, and she would no longer have to work alone at night. No matter how hostile others were to her, she learned to be grateful to those who helped her. Now, the protagonist began to realize that the reason she created the universally loved Margaret was because she herself longed to be loved. Morning came, and Velletta woke up in her room with the twins sleeping beside her. She knew she needed to let go of the past, but that was much harder than it sounded. After the ball, a large number of nobles became infatuated with Margaret, trying all sorts of ways to gain an advantage for their sons in seeking her hand in marriage. Meanwhile, people began to dig deep into her family's past, remembering they were once members of a guild that supplied the metals needed for magical items. On the other side, Carlos was giving an ultimatum to the old man of the Ebenine family, telling him not to even think about looking for blue gold elsewhere. He believed the Ebenine family only still existed due to his tolerance, and warned them that they would pay the price if they dared to defy him. Velletta wasn't surprised at all by her father's behavior. He was always throwing his weight around, and she also understood that it would be a big problem if others started making magical items. The girl knew that making magical items required two things: magic stones and blue gold. Magic stones were easy to obtain, but blue gold came from mines, so there were rumors that the Ebenine family planned to sell it to other guilds. Carlos wouldn't let it go, so Margaret knew they had to play by his rules. But Velletta reminded her that the prince was also willing to cooperate with her. It's just that the Viscount wasn't so sure about the deal, and Margaret didn't know how long the prince could protect her family, which Velletta knew made sense. The protagonist knew there was also a bad ending in the game where her friend sells the mine to the prince. Suddenly, Velletta had an idea. They should go off script. She told her friend not to sell the mine for now. To make this more convincing, she claimed they were having some difficulties in producing magical items. Margaret believed her completely and immediately agreed to her suggestion. Velletta knew her friend trusted her blindly, but that was precisely the problem. The protagonist also knew her friend had received countless marriage proposals, but she hadn't accepted a single one. Most importantly, Margaret was clueless about politics. She had also received invitations to balls, but she refused them all except for those from families with whom she had regular business dealings. Velletta knew her friend wasn't used to this sort of thing, but she needed to build connections with high society. Now that things had come to this, Margaret needed to win people's support. The Viscount's daughter panicked. Miss Olden said her friend didn't know enough people yet to host her own tea party, so the girl needed to open her own salon. Salons were places where nobles attended themed evening parties, built important connections, and discovered talent. It would be easy to promote her friend's interests in a place like that, but starting a salon required money, and she would have to ask the prince. The cafe manager asked Velletta if she was deliberately sending her friend to the prince, worried that the prince might get the wrong idea. But the girl didn't think so. As long as Margaret gained favor on her own merits, everything would be fine. The man pushed a slice of pie towards her and asked about the theme of the upcoming salon. It turned out the theme was about magic. Velletta was trying to gather intelligence on the blue-gold trade and the internal situation of the Flame Guild. But to launch the salon, she needed to find people. Then she added that nothing was more delicious than a caramel apple and asked for the pie to go. The girl was sure people would soon be raving about this dessert, and it would be a huge success for them. Afterwards, she asked about the fake badge, and the man said it was almost finished. The protagonist thought about what dessert to treat Austin with and prepared to leave. The man took her hand and escorted her to the carriage. He kissed her hand and wished her a safe journey. The protagonist recalled brainstorming with a colleague on how to make a great game on a shoestring budget. She also confessed that she had invested her own money in it, so the game had to be a success. It turned out this man was actually from the real world and had been reincarnated here. Meanwhile, Margaret arrived to meet with His Highness. Kyle was a bit surprised by her sudden request for a meeting. He had no idea what was going on. Graham also noticed her extremely serious expression and was already imagining all sorts of trouble. Margaret took a deep breath and asked Kyle to lend her some money. The two men were stunned by her sudden request. The Viscount's daughter confessed that she wanted to open a salon, but she was penniless. Miss Abedine was convinced that opening a salon would help her build the connections she needed. She was well aware she had no money to repay the loan, but she had enough abilities to offer as collateral. Moreover, if this succeeded, the prince would have the Olden family in the palm of his hand, as they were having some difficulties with their magical item production. The prince thought for a moment, then agreed. But since she was opening the salon with his money, he would visit from time to time as an investor. With the money settled, Margaret left the palace. When the prince and the knight were alone, Kyle couldn't help but laugh. The prince was convinced that Miss Ebenine was a remarkable woman. Kyle hadn't expected her to ask for a loan instead of a gift, which showed her extraordinary nerve. Graham was sure the prince appreciated that kind of attitude in a woman. They also realized Miss Abaddon was helping Velletta, but the question was where she was getting her secret intelligence from. This made the prince think that Miss Olden wasn't as simple as everyone thought. Then Kyle praised Graham for his keen observation. His Highness guessed that Velletta was taking control of her old man, and the knight should be happy about that, since he had a crush on her. Graham denied liking the girl, claiming he was just worried about her. Kyle started teasing his friend, saying the other knights would also go to the salon with him, but then realized the knight was actually planning to go with him. Meanwhile, Noah was listening to his servant's report. It turned out there were serious problems with the Olden family's magic stone production, and these problems couldn't be solved at the moment. Their customers had also noticed the decline in quality, and it all started 2 years ago. Noah was surprised by the start date of the Olden family's decline. His rival's first problem began 3 years ago when the slaves escaped from Ananta. The man remembered that the twins from the Tan clan had escaped. That day, he began to piece the clues together. It felt strange to think that Velletta was the mastermind behind it all. Noah knew Miss Olden wasn't what people said she was, but he didn't know the extent of her capabilities. So far, our people have rescued some slaves who were turned into magic stones, but many more are still being held captive. The servant believed that if the rescued slaves were fed and treated, they would be on our side, but they could also rebel. If they can't help us, then they don't belong here. Afterwards, Noah received a report on the production of new types of magical tools and was shocked by the quality and variety of the products. The man was impressed and wanted to know where the workshops were, but that was a problem as they were scattered in various corners of the city. Just then, the man noticed a drawing of something he had seen before. He had seen the exact same thing on the girls' table at the cafe that day. Now, Noah no longer had any doubts, and he decided to visit that cafe again. He needed to meet with Velletta to find answers to all his questions. Meanwhile, Velletta met with the Viscount and his daughter. Today, he was not present as Margaret's father, but as Viscount Ebenine, the head of the Flame Guild, and she wanted to make a deal with him. This surprised him, and the girl began to talk about the quality of her family's magical tools. It had plummeted. The Viscount knew about this, as it was also the reason for the crash in blue gold prices. The man was deep in debt, but he promised to pay it all off once production recovered. But that couldn't happen because Velletta knew production would continue to decline. Before that, the prince would kick her family out of the game, as she was well aware that what she was doing was the very cause of her family's downfall. The protagonist said the prince could be trusted, and by joining forces with Margaret, he could control her family. Margaret also trusted her friend and the prince completely. However, Velletta understood that as the leader of the guild and the family, the Viscount had a great responsibility, so she wanted to make a deal. The girl placed the documents on the table and requested to buy their blue gold. The Abaddon family still didn't know about the Olden family's schemes, but there was a bad ending in the game where Margaret finds out the truth, and then her end is tragic. So Velletta didn't want to reveal things for now, because the father and daughter were different people. Velletta didn't want to blackmail the Abaddon family. The contract offered a fair price for the blue gold. Margaret didn't understand why her friend had decided to buy the materials from them. It was simple. She wanted to enter the magical tool production industry. The Viscount couldn't believe the girl was serious, but she was indeed knowledgeable about manufacturing, so she wanted to start her own business. She knew her family had been struggling for the past 3 years, but the drop in production wasn't yet particularly noticeable. Moreover, if the supply of tools decreased, the prices of tools from other manufacturers would skyrocket. Velletta was well aware this would bankrupt her father, but she would run the business better than him. She asked the Viscount to seriously reconsider her offer, as it was the only way to get out from under her father's control. Margaret and her father began to carefully consider her proposal. She suddenly realized that her friend hadn't come up with this plan yesterday or today, but she had a feeling that Velletta was completely alone in this fight, and she didn't like that feeling at all. It was another ball, and Velletta was also in attendance. The place was nice, and she thought it might be the perfect spot to rent for the salon. People turned to stare, as her eyes and hair marked her as an Olden. The high society folks just hoped that Miss Olden wouldn't cause any trouble today. This annoyed her, because it was Luther who had messed up last time. The man working there completely misunderstood her and began to bow and beg for forgiveness. Even after keeping a low profile for 3 years, people were still afraid of her, which hurt. No one knew she was tired of cleaning up the real Velletta's messes. Just then, the commander of the Knights approached. She didn't expect to see him here. He was happy to see her because their last meeting was, well, not ideal. The young commander asked about her injuries. Velletta said the Duke had helped her then, and Graham asked if anything special had happened between her and the mage. Something did happen, but she wasn't going to say it. She told him that her friend was opening a salon, so she was here to discuss renting this venue. Time was flying, and the guy had to get to a meeting. Velletta thought it was the perfect excuse to take her leave, but he stopped her and invited her to dinner. This caught her completely off guard, and she couldn't figure out why he would do that. She remembered hearing at the last ball about the possibility of unlocking a new route. Now she understood why he was asking her out, but she was sure she hadn't done anything to make him like her. Graham passed it off as an apology for eavesdropping on her on the balcony. Yes, that was probably part of it, but he likely had other motives. So the girl decided to seize this new opportunity, agreed to the dinner, and suggested they also take a look around together before then. Then she invited him to check out the venue for the future salon with her. Graham was delighted to have the chance to spend time with her. So he took her hand, and they went to check out the venue together. After the walk, the man took the girl to a restaurant, and she noted his good taste. Velletta was surprised at how invested the young man was in checking everything out. Miss Olden thanked the knight, saying that with his help, they would open a wonderful place, a place even the prince would like. She was sure the young man would attend the salon's opening, as he would be with the prince. Velletta also planned to send him an invitation, and if he showed up, he would be able to overhear a very interesting conversation. He guessed she was talking about His Highness. It was only then that it dawned on him that it was Miss Olden who was supporting Miss Ebbingdon. The question now was what she and the prince could possibly talk about, and he had only just understood why Margaret trusted her so much. So he agreed to come to the opening, but asked that they send the invitation to the Knight Order in his name. Velletta agreed to handle it, and he was already looking forward to seeing her again. After dinner, Velletta headed to one of her secret labs. Austin was already waiting for her inside. The assistant seemed to be in high spirits today. He loved to work and spend other people's money. Miss Olden had said that since they were spending the prince's money, they might as well give everyone a raise. The best news of all was that the fake badge was ready. The forgery looked so realistic, it completely stunned the girl. She picked it up, admitting she never thought it would be so perfect. The twins were sure no one could tell the difference between the real and the fake. Velletta heaped praise on the girl who made the badge. The artisan confessed that the mages and artisans would do anything for Miss Olden, because only she respected their work. Sadly, the mages and artisans of the Empire were always treated as inferior, and they made a living by creating magical tools. They were treated as second-class citizens. Then Velletta came along, hired the mages and artisans, paid them a salary, and respected their work. The girl knew that all work had value, and now she had proof of the attack in her hands. Now, she could finally have an interesting conversation with the prince. The protagonist expressed her appreciation to all her assistants. She knew that if everything went according to plan, they could start their business at full speed. Meanwhile, Luther received a letter, an intelligence report. He found out that Margaret had recently met with the crown prince. The young man thought Kyle had proposed to his girl, which made him furious. In fact, he wouldn't give her up to anyone, even if it meant confronting the prince head-on. Luther asked his father for permission to marry the girl, as the amulet could fall into the hands of another family instead of theirs. Carlos didn't want to hear any more of this nonsense. His son needed to stop acting like a spoiled brat. The man had no intention of allowing his heir to marry a girl who was practically destitute. The guy couldn't believe what was happening, but Carlos said it wasn't part of the deal. But if the kid wanted to get married, he had to find himself a bride of equal social standing. Luther wouldn't accept it. He flatly refused. So his old man slapped him. The young man fell to the floor, and Carlos began to berate him. The old man was very disappointed. He hadn't solved the Ananta problem and spent all day whining about marrying some nobody. The father demanded his son get an invitation to Margaret's salon, where he could forget about her forever. Then he remembered Velletta's words, the one she had whispered to him at the ball. Meanwhile, the girls went shopping for some pretty clothes. Velletta comforted her friend, telling her she could use the prince's money to buy a dress. Besides, the dress was for the grand opening of the salon. Miss Olden told her friend to cheer up and suggested an option from the catalog. The dress was very delicate and sweet. Margaret was hesitant, saying it would be more fitting for Velletta to buy it for herself. But our protagonist just wanted to give her friend a gift. But since it bothered Margaret, she could see it as a form of payment, since her father had made a deal with the girl. But Miss Abedin was too proper, saying that bribery was a very dishonorable act. This amused Velletta. Everything was going smoothly until Luther burst into his sister's room. He demanded an invitation to Margaret's salon. The girl told her brother to go to her friend, as she was the one hosting the salon. Velletta knew her friend had rejected Luther, which was why he was harassing her. He might even try to snatch an invitation. But our girl warned him not to do that. After all, he was the heir to the Olden family. Their other brother overheard their conversation. A minute later, he reported the whole situation to their father. Carlos knew his love-crazed son had gone mad. It seemed it was time for the second son to handle the matter, if Glenn could handle it properly. He could become the heir, and Glenn didn't want to miss the opportunity. While the girls were distributing invitations to trusted clients, this guy was busy plotting how to complete his father's mission. Meanwhile, Gray received an invitation for Velletta. She wrote to him that if he visited their salon, he would not regret it. At the same time, Noah and his servant were making their way through the dark alleys of the city. The servant was shocked that even the mage himself didn't know what kind of creature had appeared in the city. Even among monsters, this was a rather bizarre-looking species. The problem was that this unknown creature was capable of growing. Right now, it was about the size of a rabbit, and yet it could injure him. So what would happen if it got bigger? The young man also realized that these creatures could cause trouble for the Empire, so he decided to hide it in a special place. After all, he needed to study it first. Then he pulled the invitation to the salon's opening from his pocket, which was now the most important thing to him. Well, the first guest had arrived for the grand opening. The ladies loved the atmosphere, which made Margaret very happy. Before the others arrived, the girls could have some drinks and cake. These were treats from the garden cafe, a favorite among high society ladies. The guests thought Margaret had hosted parties like this before because everything was so perfect. Margaret admitted that she had powdered her face beforehand so she wouldn't blush so easily. Miss Aberdeen was angry because the guests were speaking ill of her best friend. Velletta had told her earlier not to pay attention to the negative comments. Regardless of what others said, Margaret felt sad that her friend had to endure such treatment to get ahead. Just then, she was informed that the prince and the captain of the knights had arrived. They entered the venue, and everyone present began to greet him, looking quite surprised that he could make an appearance. Kyle was worried he hadn't been much help to the salon, but Margaret smiled and said he'd been a great help, so she was glad he could come. Velletta watched all this and realized that things were progressing between the two of them faster than she had expected. But this was for the better, because Margaret's ultimate goal was definitely Kyle. The prince didn't expect to be giving a lecture in a salon, but he was happy to do it for Miss Aberdeen. Then Noah appeared at the salon, saying he wouldn't miss the chance to become the prince's student, which was definitely not part of Velletta's plan. Everyone stared at him as if he had just robbed a bank. Then he pulled an invitation to the salon's opening from his pocket. Since he had annoyed the prince, he decided to sit at the end of Velletta's table. The girls stared at him, having no idea how he got an invitation. Another uninvited guest was Luther, who was about to just pull up a chair and sit down. The situation was super awkward, but no one intended to make a scene. None of this had happened in the original game, and she had been feeling good until now. Luther had shown up even after she had all but humiliated him. It was all to be blamed on pure jealousy. Margaret couldn't show him to a seat because she had no idea he was coming. But even if Noah and Luther had somehow gotten invitations, they couldn't just kick him out. After the tension eased a bit, they started talking about the amulet. The girls said that a member of the Cedar tribe had personally brought her the amulet and told her she must become its guardian. Everyone present was surprised by this, and Margaret admitted she had never seen the person again after that day. Margaret said the person seemed very calm and detached. He didn't ask for anything from her. In her eyes, it was as if he possessed all the peace in the world and nothing else mattered. It turned out the prince's great-grandmother had also been a guardian of the amulet. After that, she became a scholar of ancient history. The empress wanted to know the origin of the typhoon's eye, so she delved into research. Unfortunately, she never found the answer, but since then, the royal library has collected a large number of books on ancient history. Suddenly, Velletta asked the prince if he had read those books, and he admitted he had. He especially liked the parts about dragons. One of the books mentioned a great battle that was practically apocalyptic. The creatures were so terrifyingly powerful that not many records of what happened at the time survived. Kyle wanted to open the library to the public, so he invited Margaret to take a look. Suddenly, Noah sat down next to Velletta, noticing she looked bored. She claimed to have no interest in magic and history, but the Duke could probably find plenty to talk about with the guests. The guy was bored to death with them, and he was also jealous of the knight. The protagonist didn't understand why he would come if someone here was bothering him. Noah confessed that she was the only reason he was willing to come to the salon. He warned her that if she kept trying to avoid him, it would only make him want her more. Velletta thought to herself that this guy had absolutely zero taste, and he wasn't the least bit discouraged by it. Besides, he had a few questions for her, and it was a better place to talk than her residence. The thought of him going to her house terrified her. My God, that would be a disaster. So she decided to answer his questions right here. The guy wanted her to tell him about Ananta. The request caught Velletta completely off guard. She realized he was referring to the possible ending after saving the twins, which meant he had seen everything. Even though Noah wasn't sure if she was loyal to the Olden family, she still had no intention of revealing family matters. To her, the two situations were completely different because back then she was trying to save innocent children. Okay, there was a reason for it, but the Duke went a step further and invited her to fight against the Olden family together. Velletta couldn't figure out what this guy was thinking, especially since he hated snakes and admitted it without hiding it. It's just that Miss Olden was not like a snake at all. That's why it was hard for the guy to believe she was her father's daughter. However, it wasn't unacceptable to him. The only way to find out if she was a snake was to keep her by his side. Besides, there was something else that interested him. Besides Ananta, like that soundproof magic device she used at the cafe. It was then that Velletta realized how observant this guy was. He had actually noticed that the tools made by her workers were starting to appear on the market. That was just a small sample. Mass production was supposed to start only after the meeting with the prince. This was all because if she started selling without being prepared, the Olden family would crack down on her hard. So she had kept everything a secret until now. Just then, Graham came over and saved the girl from the awkward conversation. He relayed a message from Margaret. Margaret was waving at her, which put Velletta in a great mood. Miss Olden apologized to the Duke for having to leave him and then got up to go to her friend. Meanwhile, Noah was already calculating that they needed to talk somewhere completely private. The knight confessed he was worried about her because the Duke's reputation was something else. Graham also pointed out that she came with a guard, but last time there were two, and today only one. He had to admit that Raheel was impressive, because if he were any further away, he would be completely invisible. Velletta laughed, but in her mind, she kicked Raheel for being so careless. Everything should have been fine, but she suddenly remembered that in the game's setting, Graham and Noah were on the same level. This meant the Duke also knew all about the twins. He just wasn't showing it. A minute later, the knight brought Miss Olden to Margaret and the prince. The protagonist greeted the prince and introduced herself. The guy admitted he had heard a lot about her. After all, Margaret was always praising her best friend. Velletta chimed in that she wouldn't be friends with someone who always lies, and the prince agreed that Margaret was a straightforward person. But Velletta was a different story. She only told the truth to certain people. What's worse, sometimes she told the truth, and people thought she was lying. The prince wanted to talk to her about the magic tools right now, as it was directly related to the theme of this salon. Since a serious conversation was about to begin, Velletta asked her friend to go mingle with the other guests. After Margaret left, Miss Olden was alone with His Highness. Velletta then bluntly asked Kyle how much he knew about her father's attack on Miss Aberdeen's carriage. But there were 2 attacks that day, and she had found a crest at the scene. The guy immediately realized it was a high-quality fake made by a real expert. The protagonist handed him the crest and asked him to find out if it was real, and if it was to crush that snake once and for all. She didn't force him to make any choice. The decision was entirely in the prince's hands. She hoped this fake crest would be enough to prove she was attacked. After all, she had failed her last quest, so this was her only chance. Just then, Administrator Mode was activated because the crest was fake. The girl realized this world was not the same as she had planned, because the characters were all living their own lives. So here, she was not only Velletta, but also the developer. This meant she could use cheat codes. This was absolutely great news. Now she could pair up with anyone, but resetting things herself was a hassle. Well, she adjusted the settings, got the crest, and everything was taken care of. She changed the quest requirements, but the moment she tried to change the penalty, a bolt of lightning struck, and everything went back to how it was. She suddenly understood that even with cheat codes, she couldn't escape the penalty for failing a quest. Kyle interpreted her behavior as fear, because if Luther found out, Velletta would be in real trouble. She was determined to defeat the Olden family by any means necessary, and wanted to symbolically slap her brother a few times to bring him to his senses. Because Luther had laid hands on her more than once, she wanted to return the favor. The prince thought to himself that this girl had probably already hit her brother and wanted to do it again. But the real question was whether this crest was enough for Kyle, as the prince, to hold her family accountable. That's why she gave it to him. Obviously, she wasn't doing this out of the goodness of her heart. The deal began, and Velletta said she wanted revenge on her father. For that, she asked the prince for a trade monopoly on magic items. Kyle did not expect this at all. The request seemed a bit disrespectful to the prince, but she reminded him that he had a choice. He could see her as just another Olden, or realize she was different. To prove it, she showed him the magic tools she had made herself. The prince was shocked by their quality, which was because she didn't use slave labor to make her magic tools. Moreover, real artisans made the magic items for her voluntarily and without coercion. She also said that everything would be made in a humane way. This was the first time the guy had met someone who shared his views. Velletta truly hoped he would make a deal with her. Everything was going smoothly, but suddenly, with a bang, bandits burst into the room. Raheel rushed to the girl's side, but then a new quest popped up. They had to protect a certain amulet, and they only had 5 minutes. This was completely unexpected, even for the protagonist. There was a hole in the ceiling, and people were scattering like cockroaches. The girl realized her family had gone mad, attacking a place where Kyle and Graham were. Luther clearly didn't know about the attack either, so he jumped out to save Margaret. At least that's how it looked. But this time her father had hired some real professionals. Their target was Margaret, who was being attacked by a thug. The girl froze, completely unsure what to do next. It was then that Miss Aberdeen realized she couldn't keep running away and relying on others. She wasn't going to let her friend carry all the damn burden alone anymore, so she called Jill for backup. Velletta watched all this happen, having no idea who these intruders were. Meanwhile, Margaret was telling the guest to step aside and let the guard handle it. The protagonist then realized that it was Margaret's people who had come to help. She threw a magical protection device at the girls. As long as the guests stayed inside that energy shield, they were safe. Kyle was also watching all this, and he realized Miss Aberdeen had more guts than he thought. Noah was just sitting there nonchalantly drinking tea, while I watched Velletta being protected by a guy in a cloak. He was the one the Duke had sensed both under the ceiling of this building and at the cafe. He would never let someone with such skills slip through his fingers. Suddenly, he realized that it was Velletta Olden's wing. But at the cafe, it wasn't just this guy's presence that was felt. Meanwhile, the protagonist was racking her brain over the quest conditions, and there was only one way to go: eliminate all enemies. Developer mode wasn't working either because this event and the salon weren't in the game to begin with. So Velletta asked Raheel to help her take care of the mercenaries who were after the amulet. The guy was hesitant, but the girl had a very bad feeling about this. So she insisted. Her intuition was right, because the Duke spotted something on the ceiling. He realized they were preparing to attack with some kind of magic device. It was a fire attack, and it froze everyone in the hall. The attack looked like the end of the world. Velletta stopped thinking about herself and pleaded with Raheel to protect Margaret. The guy didn't want to listen, but he had to understand that if Margaret died, Velletta would die too. After that, she asked him if he could just watch her die. Raheel had a hard time making this decision, as he couldn't imagine life without her. So he told her to stay put and then proceeded to follow her orders. Meanwhile, the Duke was trying to stop the magic attack. To do so, he used his mental magic. While the Duke dealt with the magic, Gray and Raheel took on the bandits. Suddenly, Raheel saw a bandit stab Velletta with a knife. The protagonist was completely stunned and froze on the spot. In that moment, his world began to crumble. He rushed towards her, and the bandit tried to run, but didn't get far before Raheel attacked. He killed him with a single, precise strike. After that, he ran to his mistress. Velletta was alive and conscious. Raheel pleaded with her not to die, to hold on. Margaret was running towards them, but the girl didn't want the twins to go back to that horrible place again. It seemed someone wasn't going to let Miss Aberdeen get any closer. Raheel was ready to take down anyone who dared to breathe in her direction. Margaret was wailing, hoping for some kind of medicine like the one her friend had taken before. Just then, the Duke appeared and told the guy to back off. No one knew that if this guy kept this up, the girl was as good as dead. Raheel was furious, but he knew the guy had a point. Noah pushed the guard aside and began to heal the protagonist. He activated his healing magic and channeled it directly to Velletta. The Duke knew that without his help, she would have been gone, but now she was starting to come around. But on top of the healing magic, the guy also used some tracking magic. As soon as she woke up, she ordered Raheel to head to the Aberdeen estate, but she told the Duke to stay put. After the failed attack, Carlos punished his son because the situation had gone from bad to worse. Luther also came to ask for his father's forgiveness and was punished as well. He revealed that Velletta was not dead and that Noah had saved her, which infuriated his father. Not only had the girl deceived her father about her relationship with Noah, but she had also lied about Ananta's twins. This was a bombshell in the conversation, as their problems had started right after the twins disappeared. Carlos couldn't believe his own daughter had been pushing him towards disaster for 3 years. Just then, an explosion was heard, and the main gate collapsed. It was Noah, watching from the air as Carlos and Luther began to scramble. This was the Duke's revenge for those who dared to attack Velletta. Even on the verge of death, Miss Olden was beautiful and composed. The whole situation fascinated him, with too many questions and too few answers. Strangely, the tracking magic had also stopped working, but he decided to think about that later. Now was the time to execute his plan. Velletta was asleep, and Raheel was sitting by her side. She woke up, sat up, and asked him why he hadn't removed the bandages. It turned out they were at Margaret's house. After she sent the guy here yesterday, she had turned off the tracking magic for 6 hours. She knew there were a lot of variables, but one thing was clear: Noah had saved her life. Just then, Raheel spoke to her. He offered to find the person who did this and tear him to shreds. Roxanne and Lucy were safe and sound with Austin, and the Olden estate was under surveillance. The surveillance began because when Roxanne went to pick up Lucy, she saw Carlos in a fit of rage. She witnessed a murder, and Velletta actually praised the guy for completing his mission. Then, without warning, we get an alert that the amulet has cracked and its magic is starting to leak, corrupting it. Velletta woke up early, and Margaret and Graham came to see her because they were very worried about her. The protagonist tried to reassure them, saying the pain was almost gone and the Duke's healing had helped. To be honest, Miss Aberdeen felt guilty about the whole thing and apologized to her friend for it. The protagonist didn't understand why her friend was blaming herself, as she hadn't hired the thugs or caused trouble. Her friend being here was normal. It was her house. But why was the captain here too? He said he was representing the Crown Prince. His Highness had been very worried about her since the attack on the salon and feared another attack. Graham believed his sword protected not only the royal family, but everyone in the Empire, which is why he was here. The captain also told Velletta that the prince was furious and had ordered that the masterminds of the attack be found and made to pay, no matter the cost. The protagonist was grateful and asked Graham to tell Kyle that she would visit the prince as soon as she was better. The guy agreed and then left the room. In the hallway, he finally let his anger show. He was also furious and couldn't figure out who would attack this girl. The only thing he was sure of was that he would never forgive whoever did this. On the other hand, Velletta was observing her friend closely, not understanding why she was so upset. Miss Aberdeen confessed that she had recently noticed a crack on the amulet. It seemed she hadn't hidden it well enough in her clothes. Velletta listened quietly as her friend said she hadn't dropped it or bumped into anything, but the crack appeared anyway. This made Margaret doubt if she was fit to be a guardian, and she was afraid she would be the reason it shattered completely. The protagonist told her friend not to worry, as Lucille had given no instructions that the thing couldn't be broken. Besides, the girl needed to understand that the amulet belonged to her, so she could do whatever she wanted with it, and no one could say anything. But Margaret was worried that if she couldn't protect the amulet, she didn't deserve to be called its guardian. The problem was Miss Aberdeen had things mixed up, and Velletta asked her to remember that she owned the stone, not the other way around. But it wasn't just the amulet. Velletta's overall condition was also worrying the girl a lot. So our protagonist said that thanks to the Duke, she didn't feel any pain. Despite this, the girl asked her friend to work with the prince to find out who attacked the salon. Margaret promised to do everything in her power not to disappoint her friend who trusted her so much. So Miss Aberdeen decided to make their enemies suffer twice as much. After Margaret left, Velletta realized the time had come, because ever since the amulet cracked, its energy had been leaking. Our protagonist understood that Slahin's resurrection was near, and when the amulet completely shattered, Margaret would learn the whole truth. The monster's resurrection couldn't be stopped, as it was guarded by a whole bunch of damn monsters. Despite this, the girl sent a message to Austin through Raheel, telling him to keep a close watch and report any changes at the location she had pointed out earlier. She planned to go see the guy herself after a short rest. Velletta still wasn't feeling well, so she rested in bed. She thought to herself that although Austin was supposed to be digging up information on the amulet, she couldn't put everything else on hold. Most importantly, she had to make sure the Olden family couldn't find her. Just then, Roxanne returned. Raheel went to the window and opened it to let his sister in. Velletta was happy to see Roxanne after so long, but Roxanne was looking around the room for someone. You could almost feel the murderous aura radiating from her. She wanted to get her hands on the despicable person who had stabbed Velletta. She didn't know where he was, and her brother told her that the prince was already hunting the bastard down. It was clear the twins wanted to find their mistress's attacker themselves and make them pay. Natalie, who was lounging on the balcony, saw right through them. The siblings would take down anyone who dared to disrespect the girl. Velletta was shocked to see her there. Raheel chimed in that Austin wanted to talk to Natalie. However, the stepsister couldn't believe that Austin Hill, whom every noble family wanted to hire, was working for Velletta. Natalie also couldn't figure out how her little sister had managed to pull the children of the Don family to her side. The dark-haired girl thought to herself that her sister might be the mysterious woman who had disrupted the auction 3 years ago. Natalie scolded her sister for always playing dumb about their father's business, and then snatching the twins from under his nose. Velletta didn't rush to answer her sister's questions, and Natalie had more questions now because family members weren't allowed to participate in the auction. When her sister remained silent, the dark-haired girl thought to herself, "It seems ignorance is bliss, huh?" Although she was dying to know the details, she didn't press the matter and just pushed a package towards the protagonist. Basically, it was a gift from an older sister to a younger sister who had been beaten and almost died. The protagonist tore open the envelope and began to look at what was inside. It was dirt on their father and the entire family, involving an underground auction and the creation of magic stones. Natalie wondered if her little gift pleased her sister. This greatly improved the protagonist's mood. This was a pretty big move from Natalie, and Velletta was grateful. And Carlos's seal might come in handy on some of the documents. The dark-haired girl told the protagonist that their father and Glenn had planned the attack on the salon, which is why their father got rid of Glenn. The girl blamed herself for not seeing the obvious. If she had known all this earlier, she could have protected her sister. Natalie recalled the time she overheard relatives talking about killing her sister and how much she had suffered over it afterward. The protagonist used to see her sister as just a helper and nothing more, but now she had a warmer feeling towards her. Velletta now wanted to help her sister, since she had taken such a big risk for her, and wanted to find a place where she could live safely. Since Austin wanted to see Natalie, the protagonist decided to have her sister deliver the documents on their family herself. After all, if they wanted to make sure their enemies could never hurt anyone again, they needed to ensure they were completely eliminated. Besides, Velletta wanted to find a use for Natalie's gift, so she entrusted this task to Austin. Raheel escorted the girl out, and when he returned, he gave Velletta a note saying that the magic energy at that place was starting to drain faster. Meanwhile, the prince was informed that the gates of the Olden estate had been completely destroyed. Graham confirmed reports of a massive fire, which made Kyle laugh like a madman. His Highness even felt a twinge of regret for not being able to witness it himself, as he would never lose interest in the downfall of the Olden family. However, he was also curious about who did it, but the captain and the other knights had no clue. Graham was in charge of investigating the matter, and the prince was waiting for an answer on the arsonist's identity when a servant entered the office to announce that Noah had come for an urgent audience with the prince. First the invitation, then the salon visit, and now an audience. Kyle was beginning to genuinely dislike meeting with the mage so frequently. Noah, meanwhile, sat leisurely by the living room window, awaiting the prince and his loyal knight. To be honest, His Highness the Prince was not looking forward to this meeting, but the man had come with goodwill and news. However, once the conversation began, the prince's worries did not disappear but grew heavier, which saddened the mage. It turned out that Noah was the mastermind behind the arson, but he had held back to avoid harming the prince's people and other innocents. He confessed that he had long been itching to burn that den of vipers to the ground. Kyle understood that the mage was taking a risk by saying this to his face, but today he decided to let him off the hook. His Highness wanted to know why the Duke did it. Was it because of an old grudge or because of the amulet? Noah sighed, saying he wasn't that interested in the amulet. The prince pondered the reason and concluded that the attack on the lovely lady of the Olden house had angered his guest. The Duke knew too many people coveted the amulet, so he couldn't be bothered to even try for it. Kyle actually felt a little sorry for Velletta, as Noah was deeply infatuated with her. Driven by his feelings for the girl, Noah offered to help the heir to the throne take down the Olden family. He was well aware that the Olden family were frequenters of the capital's back alleys, which could be called the mage's natural habitat. The lives of those vipers depended on the prince, so the Duke wanted to completely destroy their entire operation. The prince realized this guy had a deep-seated hatred for Carlos and decided to join forces with him. The first piece of information the Duke revealed to the prince was that monsters were being born in the shadows. Noah admitted that the monsters looked like something a child would make out of clay. The mage had buried himself in books in the library for a long time, but had found nothing on these creatures. But he wouldn't be a master of his craft if he found nothing, so he had to put in more effort. The mage tested them and found that even at that size, they could injure him. The prince was horrified. Most importantly, they were still growing, so the Duke thought Graham should handle it. Graham, in turn, believed it was the Duke's family's duty to stop those disgusting creatures from attacking the Empire. Noah didn't refuse, but he intended to personally guard the Imperial capital. The Knight Commander gritted his teeth when Noah said that if he wasn't around or was moving about, who knew who would protect the Empire from the monster infestation? The Knight Commander didn't want to deal with this, as he knew the Duke was paving the way to court Velletta. But he had no choice and decided to form an investigation team to gather intelligence. His Highness hoped his subordinate would not let him down, because if they failed, the entire empire would be in huge trouble. His Highness recalled an old family prophecy, and he truly hoped it would not come true. Meanwhile, a maid informed Velletta that His Highness the Prince had come to visit. It was a surprise, and although she understood there was a reason, it still disrupted her schedule. She changed her clothes and was escorted by the butler of the Ebony estate to meet the prince. Meanwhile, Kyle came to visit Velletta and met Margaret while waiting. The protagonist couldn't help but notice the flirting between the little couple. She sat down, seeing that the progress between the two was much faster than in the game. It gave her a strange feeling, like a mother whose daughter just got a boyfriend. Velletta told the prince she was fine, and she truly hoped so. After the pleasantries, the prince got down to business and asked if Margaret knew what request Velletta had made of him. Miss Ebbingdon knew, and she was fed up with relying on the Olden family. Kyle mused that the Empire had always needed the Olden family and the magical tools they produced. But the prince decided to find a new supplier of magical tools, so he would no longer have to rely on Carlos. Yet when he saw the magical item, he immediately knew where all the other items would be made. He gave it to a mage to study, and the man was deeply impressed by its quality. Furthermore, there were no emotions of anger, fear, or sadness in the item. The prince was equally shocked that the mages and artisans were working for the girl willingly and were also being paid. Kyle smiled, realizing he had absolutely no reason to refuse a contract with Velletta. His Highness couldn't personally approve her production, so he wanted to show her products to others. This was a good sign, and the protagonist felt relieved, knowing she had won His Highness's support. She prepared to get the best tools ready for the presentation, hoping the Emperor would put a stop to her father's suspicious activities. Kyle admitted that he was very much looking forward to her presentation. Velletta decided to choose a butterfly as the symbol for her products, thinking it was perfect. Kyle was once again struck by the audacity of the girl before him, and all of this was just because the protagonist had asked His Highness to escort her. She was almost trembling with excitement, anticipating the moment her father would realize his entire empire was crumbling because of her. Afterward, she promised the prince she would send him information about Ananta as soon as possible, and that for now, the insignia and documents he had should be enough. In that moment, Kyle realized he wasn't looking at a butterfly, but a spider that could devour butterflies. Velletta knew her father was behind the attack on her, so simply stabbing him in the back wasn't enough. The prince didn't expect her to be running around gathering intelligence in her condition, but the protagonist was fine because Noah had healed her injuries. That mage was truly skilled. She didn't care if her father was watching her, as she had very powerful backing. Despite this, he still told her not to push herself too hard and to take care of her health. Kyle couldn't understand her recklessness, even though she claimed she wasn't the type to sacrifice herself. But in his eyes, the situation was completely different. She knew her actions might be seen that way, but she really just wanted to atone for her mistakes. Meanwhile, Velletta was about to tell her friend how kind and wonderful the prince was. When she offered to help the prince with his love life, he became flustered and retreated into his carriage. He had no idea what had just happened and just wanted to get out of there, far away from her. The protagonist even teared up a little. She hadn't expected the prince to be so considerate. Just then, the twins appeared and whisked her away, saying it wasn't safe for her on the street. Velletta arrived at the headquarters, where the employees greeted her with an almost excessive enthusiasm, as if they were all her #1 fans. After she recovered from the crazy welcome, she noticed Natalie sitting on the sofa. Her older sister hadn't suffered much here, but she was annoyed that everyone adored Velletta. Just then, Austin spoke up. He had finished reading the documents and had drawn up a revenge plan for Velletta's enemies. Natalie hadn't expected him to be like this, and even Velletta thought he was overdoing it a bit. Once things calmed down a bit, he planned to take care of Carlos and all his minions. Natalie admitted she had never realized her sister and her cronies were secretly sabotaging Ananta's work. The black-haired girl fully supported the protagonist. She had suffered a lot in the family because of her hair color. Natalie was happy to help her younger sister, and besides, Austin had already dug up dirt on all the family members, and Velletta was planning to monopolize the trade. It was clear the protagonist had surpassed Carlos. People often say that a genius and a villain are two sides of the same coin. Austin recalled the first time he met her, when he was kidnapped on her orders. It was obvious she had a clear goal even back then. This made her a little frustrated, as she hadn't expected him to bring that up. Just then, Jerome walked into the office with a report. Natalie never imagined the Garden Cafe was actually her sister's business, and all the rumors about her and the manager were just a smokescreen to avoid unnecessary problems. Speaking of rumors, the hottest topic right now was the salon attack. Miss Ebbington's reputation had also improved, as people admired her composure during the salon attack. Natalie realized her sister was using the cafe to gather intelligence. Now it was time to spread the rumor that the Ebbington family was the supplier of the magical tool blue gold. This would help Margaret start to break free from the Olden family's influence. Because once Margaret was independent, she would be truly free. To achieve this, Velletta was planning to deal with Ananta in earnest, cutting it off at the source. Suddenly, Jerome mentioned that people were also talking about Miss Velletta. The rumor was that after being injured, she had a complete breakdown, screaming, crying, and being very emotional. Then she fainted. Her reputation had improved because everyone thought she had saved Margaret and the others at the salon. Natalie noticed her sister's strange reaction and asked what was wrong. After all, an improved reputation was a good thing, wasn't it? The girl was super flustered. No one had ever said anything nice about her. I mean, even in the real world, she was always picked on and never heard a kind word. Then, Jerome handed her a gift from the magic artisans, who were also very worried about her and had poured all their effort into making it. She accepted the gift, thinking that magical tools could also be sold to commoners, which would certainly help improve their image. Natalie didn't understand why her sister was crying and called her a fool. Anyway, Velletta was about to go out on an errand and reminded Austin about Newport. Austin remembered that he was supposed to plant that thing in areas with pollution and soil erosion. Once, the protagonist had sent people to collect as much of that grass as possible, but Austin got tired of it and bought a piece of land to start growing it himself. In fact, this herb was the only thing that could resist Slahan's corrosion. The girl thanked him for his help and was about to go out on her errand. Now she and Jerome were on their way to Mount Moldo. She raised her hands and said that this time she had something very important to take care of and that she never bothered with trivial matters. But before that, they stopped at a cafe where Jerome noticed Noah's carriage. This was the last turn of events she had expected. Just then, the insignia of the man rolled to the girl's feet. He bent down to pick it up and greeted her. It turned out Noah had been wanting to see her, and this was his only chance to do so. The problem was the protagonist had no idea why they needed to meet. He had gone to Margaret's house first, but there were too many guards, so he didn't go any further. Then he heard she had a young lover and decided to come here. The Duke looked intimidating, so the twins shielded Velletta. This gesture made it clear to the Duke that the Tang twins were not protecting just anyone. Velletta asked him to keep her bodyguards' identities a secret, as the country was full of outlaws. Noah was curious who she was referring to specifically, and she replied that the Empire was full of people with ulterior motives. Noah understood and smiled. She found herself thinking his smile was quite handsome. Noah really liked the atmosphere of their conversation. Things were going even better than he had expected. Then he guessed that her attire was probably not for a date with a lover, which meant she was on a mission. Therefore, as payment for keeping the twins secret, he offered to give her a ride wherever she wanted to go. The protagonist said she was leaving the capital for a few days to rest. The Duke perked up as he hadn't expected his healing to fail. After examining her, he said she was healthy, but she said that was only physically. Her mental trauma was still deep. Since the girl was not cooperating, the Duke decided to activate a danger detection spell on her. Velletta assured the mage that she would visit him as soon as she returned to the capital to thank him personally for everything. Despite this, he didn't insist, only asking her to take his carriage for her trip. Strangely, when he showed concern, it seemed genuine. Although the girl didn't like the idea. She got into the Duke's carriage, but she knew she and the twins would have to escape soon. The girl thought that if she had a danger detection spell on her, the carriage likely had a tracking spell on it as well. As they passed a small shop, the girl had them stop the carriage as she needed to buy something. Velletta and the twins left their suitcases in the carriage and went into the shop. Now, she and the kids were free to head to Mount Moldo. Meanwhile, in the capital, everyone was talking about a new and interesting magical tool that could be found in the market. Everyone knew it wasn't Carlos's handiwork, and that it was Margaret and her family who were supplying the blue gold for these tools. The girl let the prince know that everything was going according to plan. His Highness saw that despite the girl stabbing Carlos in the back, his business was still thriving. Kyle was worried about Margaret, as her move was reckless and Carlos might retaliate against her family. But Miss Ebbingdon and her family were determined to stand with Velletta to the end and were fully prepared. Until now, the prince had thought only one party in this alliance was playing dumb, but it turned out Margaret was no better than her friend. Margaret couldn't understand how the Emperor could work with Carlos, and it was then that the prince realized she knew nothing about Ananta. In fact, Carlos had long been in negotiations with the Emperor about trade. The prince also knew he had to protect Margaret from Alden, as trouble was surely brewing after what he and Velletta had done. The girl told him not to worry, as she and her friend had thought things through and were prepared to protect themselves. Their conversation was interrupted by a report about Carlos. It turned out that a group of unidentified individuals had just attacked Ananta. The Marquis's men were all dead, and the prisoners had escaped, which meant the whole operation was basically ruined. Kyle thought it was Margaret's plan, but her expression showed she had no idea what they were talking about. So the prince decided to track down these attackers and keep an eye on the Olden estate at the same time. After the messenger left, Margaret desperately wanted to know what this was all about. It turned out that despite her father working with Carlos, she had never heard of Ananta. Kyle didn't go into detail, only saying it was some underground operation of the Olden family. Margaret didn't press the issue, only saying she was glad things were turning out this way, as Olden would now be too busy to bother with the magical tools. Besides, she thought it was great news that this black market auction would no longer be held. Carlos was furious because Ananta had been attacked the day before the auction. The Marquis couldn't understand how it had happened and couldn't believe someone would think an attack would be announced in advance. It was also strange that the guards couldn't use their protective magical items. Never mind the guards. Carlos was more interested in where his son was. It turned out he was still looking for Velletta. Old man Olden thought Luther was useless, so he decided to, well, let's just say he was considering replacing him. Meanwhile, in the forest, the girl's ears started to itch terribly. She remembered a saying that if your ears itch, it means someone is cursing you and you'll live a long life. She didn't really believe in superstitions, so she got back to business and told the twins they were going to get something. The Duke was at his desk, berating a servant for losing Velletta, even though he knew the chances of catching her were slim. Noah, for his part, was at home missing the protagonist, but he had called off the surveillance as it was getting nowhere. So he decided to start clearing the streets of monsters. Lost in the forest, the twins had no idea whose things they were supposed to steal in these mountains, or how they were supposed to do it. Nevertheless, they trusted their mistress had a plan and were ready to obey any order. This time she wasn't even going to stand by. She wanted to personally participate in this theft. She reminded the twins how they used to think she was weak, but she had gotten much stronger since then. Suddenly, Raheel stopped the girls and turned around. Just then, Raheel noticed they weren't alone in the clearing. Velletta was startled because the person was charging straight at her. The newcomer was Graham, and he was charging at Raheel. With those heterochromatic eyes, the Knight Commander immediately recognized he was facing a member of the Tang clan. He quickly sheathed his sword as he saw Velletta standing right in front of him. Although the knight apologized, the siblings already disliked him for scaring their mistress. The girl stood up and asked what was going on and why he was swinging his sword around like a madman. The man couldn't tell her about the mission, but he begged her to leave the mountain because it was dangerous. He thought the place was too dangerous because of the monsters, so he and his squad had come to exterminate them. The problem was these monsters were otherworldly creatures, so they could appear anywhere. But if there was a large number of monsters on this mountain, then even evil knew what kind of power she was trying to get her hands on. Due to the monster's presence, The knight invited the girl and the twins to join him at his camp. Velletta couldn't go with the knight right now, but she asked him to keep her guardian's secret. The man promised to keep it, and Velletta was grateful to him for that. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. When the girl was alone in the clearing, she opened her map to find a new route to her destination. Several points appeared on the map, and the group needed to investigate all of them. They had been walking for a while, so they decided to take a break. Suddenly, a hidden message popped up stating that if Velletta met all the conditions, a secret quest would appear. This was great news, because if she did well, she would gain both power and some unknown creature. And so, they reached the correct cave. The girl was ready to go in, but the twins sensed danger. The protagonist was sure of one thing. They had to go in and complete this quest. They walked for a long time and were almost at their goal. Velletta was ecstatic. She had finally found what she was looking for in the next world. A huge shadow loomed before her. The shadow had been waiting for a visitor for a long time, but no one had appeared, so now it was going to take a good look at the girl. The thing seemed confused, as it felt humans shouldn't be this pathetic, but the girl knew she had to make a deal with it. The situation was strange, as the shadow found Velletta's energy too odd for a human. The girl grinned and said that the only way he would find out what she was is if he came with her. The shadow understood that this strange girl wanted to make a contract with it. Suddenly, the creature became stubborn, so our girl started laying down the law. If the shadow didn't want to make a deal, Velletta would tell all the monsters where to find it. It was no choice at all. Either come with her or be destroyed. The thing knew it was stronger than a human, but around Velletta, it didn't feel that way. The girl confessed that she needed this contract to take down Slahan. Velletta believed it was possible if the shadow and the guardian of the amulet joined forces. To get the creature to come with her, Velletta added a clause to the contract stating that it would be free once they killed Slahan. The shadow agreed. To seal the contract, the girl had to take a candle. Then the stone cracked open, revealing a crystal that the girl had to hold tightly in her hand. Holding the crystal, the girl repeated the terms of the contract. The creature accepted the terms, and her as its master. Velletta asked Rinnerhill to take good care of her. Rinnerhill certainly appreciated Velletta's looks and spirit. He wondered why it felt like her soul was separate from her body. This was insane, so she asked how the creature knew. She wondered if Renner could see and feel everything she did, even the game interface. This made her curious. Could he see the screen? So she asked him what was in front of her right now. No, he only saw his former prison and the stuff. The blue screen was still only visible to her. They had to leave the cave. The monsters sensed that the dragon was free. The problem was that he couldn't use his power, so she suggested they cooperate. They rushed out of the cave, and she decided to unleash the dragon's power on the monsters. It was a complete and utter victory against the things. Looking at the dead monsters, she knew she had made the right decision to use the dragon's power. Velletta complained that people thought she was weak, but Renner took that back, saying only that she was insane. Renner didn't celebrate with her. He saw her soul as a doormat willing to do anything to survive. Velletta didn't realize she had pushed herself too hard until she was about to collapse. But before she fell, Rosca caught her. Just then, she received a message from the game, saying her body wasn't strong enough to use that skill yet. As the group left the forest, Renner reminded her that their enemies would now start hunting her. He also reminded her that she could still back out, but the protagonist knew that if she did, Renner would offer advice, as he knew she would die sooner or later. The girl decided to stick to the path she had chosen, until the very end. Morning came, and they reached the foot of Mount Moldo. Renner looked at the twins, unable to figure out how she had convinced such talented people to work for her. Although the protagonist said only the two of them could protect her, he couldn't understand why and how she acted like a grumpy old woman. The girl was fed up with this dragon. She just wanted to take a bath and sleep, but her younger siblings were starving. The twins did look like they hadn't eaten in days, so in town, the girl promised to buy them a whole bunch of delicious food. Suddenly, Graham and his squad of knights burst out of the bushes and into the clearing. The man was completely confused as to why Miss Olden was still wandering around the forest and hadn't left. Velletta, as usual, made up a story about losing something important and having to come back for it. The protagonist stared at the knight commander, wondering why he was here instead of out hunting monsters. It turned out they had all disappeared in a completely mysterious and inexplicable way. Miss Olden put on a confused expression, suggesting it was all a bad omen. Graham couldn't figure it out either, so his first instinct was to return to the capital and report everything to the Emperor. The girl felt Graham needed to hurry, while she could relax in the nearest village. But the man wanted to personally escort her back to the capital, as he was worried about her health. The knight wouldn't take no for an answer, asking for her understanding and forgiveness. So she accepted his invitation, and now, feasting in a fancy cafe, she realized there was nothing better than having good connections. Velletta was enjoying the food, but what she enjoyed more was seeing the twins eating well and being happy. The girl had to eat more than usual today because Renner hadn't tasted food in a long time and was now making her chew for him. Raheel and Roscoe were also eating with gusto, and the girl said she would pay for them personally to thank them for their work. Since the girl wouldn't let the knight pay for the meal, he offered to let her and her people stay in the house he had rented for his soldiers, some of whom had already returned to the city. After lunch, the man suggested a walk. She had almost forgotten that she had unlocked his ending because of Noah. Velletta wanted to refuse Graham, but Renner chimed in. He wanted to go for a walk. He hadn't been out of that cave in 1,000 years. Because of the voice in her head, the girl agreed to the walk, which made the knight beam. The town was to the girl's liking, full of people living their own lives. Even so, it was super laid back, and the knight loved being here because he felt peace and security. Graham admitted that after the salon attack, he felt guilty about her getting hurt. Velletta reassured him that it wasn't his fault, and, moreover, the peace and tranquility of this town were all thanks to him. Plus, thanks to him, she felt joy and peace for the first time in a long time. She was grateful for that. Meanwhile, in the cave where Renner had been, an entity slipped in. It noticed that someone had already been there. Night fell, and Velletta was getting ready for bed. She was checking the system messages. She had completed one quest, and another popped up. If she handled it properly, she would get a happy ending. Otherwise, she would lose the chance to choose. Then, she activated a magical item to prevent anyone from eavesdropping and began talking to the dragon, saying she could see things that even he couldn't. He thought for a long time, then realized that this body didn't really belong to her, but was merely a vessel for her soul. That was about the gist of it, but she hadn't stolen the body. In fact, she might have died 3 years ago. She couldn't exactly prove or disprove her claims, so Reyna had to decide for himself whether to believe her. It was complicated, and our girl felt guilty for occupying the real Verita's body, even if it was an accident. She planned to confess everything to her friends after winning the war against evil. Besides, she had also received some clues on how to defeat the enemy, but Reyna couldn't see them. On the other hand, Reyna was wondering why there were a dozen danger detection spells on her body. Some weirdo had cast them, but she couldn't remove them, so she just left them alone. Verita didn't want to remove the spells in case Noah showed up. Even if he was a handsome guy, she just wanted to be alone for a while. So Reyna turned into a cute little shadow and separated from her. She poked his cheek. Morning came, and she woke up to find herself cuddling with Rosie and Lahir. The kids were asleep, and Reyna was surprised the heroine found them cute and harmless. After Verita fell asleep, the soul of an evil dragon appeared in the room, and he realized someone desperately wanted her dead. There were people she wanted to kill, but he would bring tens of thousands of deaths and devour her, because she was the one who stole his dinner. Meanwhile, Margaret took Kyle to see a prototype of a high-quality magical item. The tea party was in full swing, but the prince was gloomy because they were still talking about how amazing Verita was. Since he possessed magic himself, he knew that spells wouldn't be powerful if there were doubts in one's heart, and that good intentions would bring good results, and vice versa. Margaret, however, believed it largely depended on the type of magic one practiced, and, therefore, it also depended on their mental health. It was a good point, and the prince decided to do some research. The girl was happy to be of help. The weather was nice, so they went for a walk in the park. Night fell, and Carlos was furious. He hadn't expected a competitor to appear in the market, let alone for the Aberdeen family to stab him in the back. So he craved revenge, and just then, a shadow appeared in his office, asking him just how much he wanted his enemy to die. The Marquis was furious with the Aberdeen family, but until this moment, he had no idea that the mastermind behind it all was his own daughter. From the shadow's detailed description, Carlos recognized Verita. The shadow conjured a black pill for Carlos, saying that if he swallowed it, he would gain the power to kill his daughter. He wanted revenge, but he didn't want to risk swallowing some mysterious substance himself, so he summoned Luther. Meanwhile, Noah was slaying monsters in the city streets. There used to be far fewer of them. The Duke didn't want to do everything himself, so he decided to call for Elliot. But on the other hand, the situation wasn't that bad yet. The assistant also informed the magician that Graham had sent a report after his sortie on Mount Moldo. The report stated that the monsters had vanished in an instant and never reappeared. Right now, the monsters in the meeting were not his concern. He was worried about how long Verita had been away from the city. It turned out to be 10 days already. Noah had no shortage of admirers, but he was fixated on the one he couldn't have. Just then, Verita was heading home with the twins. She desperately wanted a change of scenery, and her younger siblings suggested she quit her job and move away with them. She couldn't do that just yet, but she promised that once she dealt with her father, they would buy a house and live together. The knight escorted her home and suggested taking her to the royal palace for safety. But she refused. Graham hadn't considered that doing so would spark rumors about her and the prince. Everyone was gossiping about Margaret and Kyle right now, but if she got involved, she would become the target of all the hatred. Realizing this, the guy was in no hurry to go about his business, and then he suggested she return to his mansion. He claimed it was for her own good, as enemies couldn't enter his place. Verita had no doubt about that. But really, what did rumors matter, even if they were about her and the commander? It took him a second to understand what she meant. The guy was extremely embarrassed. He knew he should have kept his mouth shut. He kissed the girl's hand goodbye, saying it was an honor to protect her on their 5-day journey. As soon as the guy left, Lahir and Rosie said they didn't like him and wanted to take care of him. Just then, Noah arrived at the Aberdeen estate, not expecting to find Verita with Graham. The guy knew the commander was interested in Verita, but their meeting in the woods must have been a coincidence, right? He was well aware he looked ridiculous, but it was the only way he could come to terms with it. The only silver lining was that the girl couldn't break that danger detection spell. At the same time, he wanted to cast a spell on her that would let him know her every move. Only now did he realize he was jealous and would do anything to get Verita's attention. He knew he was completely smitten with the girl. At home, Margaret greeted the heroine. She was all smiles, and the girls hugged as if they hadn't seen each other in 10 years, not just 10 days. Verita admitted she had been terrified the entire trip, worried that Luther would cause trouble for her friend, and was relieved that he hadn't. As for Margaret, she had been extremely cautious the whole time so as not to worry her friend. Miss Aberdeen couldn't wait to hear about Verita's adventures. She had so much to tell the heroine, but the moment she saw her, it all flew out of her mind. That being the case, Verita suggested they go on a picnic tomorrow. Afterwards, they had a sumptuous dinner, and the girl realized the Aberdeen family had a top-tier chef. Meanwhile, Reyna concluded that Verita hadn't lied to him, because Margaret did seem like a good person. The next day, the girls went for a picnic in a very crowded place where everyone was talking about them. They even went shopping, and Margaret was worried that Verita didn't buy herself anything she truly wanted. The girls snapped up some beautiful dresses, as they had long since begun preparing for the downfall of the Alden family. Margaret adored Verita and couldn't imagine life without her best friend. When Verita mentioned getting close to Kyle, even walking with him in the garden, Miss Aberdeen became very flustered. Margaret was all sorts of confused about her feelings for the prince, even though she saw the good in him. Come to think of it, it was no wonder she couldn't believe her luck, as all her fiancés had either been complete jerks or Luther. Lacking any confidence, Margaret didn't believe the prince actually liked her, and not just her amulet. Verita hugged Margaret tightly, knowing the prince loved her friend more than her friend loved him, even if he didn't say it outright. Besides, her friend could do whatever she wanted, because the heroine would always have her back. That night, Verita talked with the twins, and they hadn't noticed anything strange, which was bad news because her family was a bunch of schemers. Knowing her brother and father, the girl couldn't figure out why they hadn't sent anyone to follow her. Reyna didn't sense anything unusual either and was sure everything was normal. All sorts of rumors should have reached her father and brother by now. So why was it so quiet? It was obvious her family was plotting something. So she asked the creature if he could do her a favor. So, Verita had Reyna sneak into Carlos and Luther's shadows to see what they were plotting. This required Verita's own magic, so the process began. Just then, a system message popped up asking if Verita wanted to see everything Reyna was seeing. This was strange because before this message, the heroine thought she and the creature shared the same vision. To see everything Reyna saw, the The girl clicked the corresponding button on the screen. She flopped on her bed and started watching the blue screen in front of her, just like watching TV. The silence in the house gave the heroine the creeps. She told Reina he needed to check Carlos's study on the 3rd floor. Her assistant was in her old mansion, where it was eerily quiet, and there was a spell on her father's study door that could block other magic. There was no one inside, so the girl just had the dragon look around the room. The girl got goosebumps all over. It wasn't winter, so she knew it was what her assistant was feeling. The study hadn't been entered for at least 3 days. They hadn't even cleaned it. The girl couldn't believe her father would, or could just abandon everything and run off to who knows where. It was reasonable to think there were secret passages in the house, but she had him check the other rooms first. Things were getting weirder and weirder. All the rooms were empty, and every single one was a mess. Only in the heroine's room was there a trace of an aura. It was the trace of a special person, a true master, which really took the heroine by surprise. She knew very well that among all of Carlos's children, only Luther and Natalie could use an aura, but they weren't masters, and she doubted she had angered someone that dangerous. Verita gritted her teeth. She knew her assistant hadn't imagined or mistaken the trace of the aura. There was no other evidence in the house, so Verita told Reina it was time to go back. The atmosphere in the girl's room was tense, as she had never imagined someone in her family could become a master. Verita didn't want to come out from behind the scenes so soon, but she had no choice, so she had them bring Jill to her. Lahir was ready to take on any master, but the heroine wanted to figure out what was going on first. Jill was all fired up, so the moment she entered, she asked what Luther and Carlos had screwed up this time. The girl reported that their people were still watching the house, but it had been dead silent for the past few days. Meanwhile, her father's carriage had been going back and forth several times a day, apparently empty. The girl let the servants rest, but she couldn't sleep herself and was trying hard to think everything through. She didn't understand anything, because her father had never run away before and always saw everything through to the end. Meanwhile, Carlos had his son locked in a cell in a cave. The guy was writhing in pain, but the man ordered him to endure it for the sake of power. The man hadn't taken the strange pill himself, but had given it to Luther, and now it was Luther who was suffering for the both of them. Carlos knew very well that his son would do anything to get Margaret, so he forced his son to endure the pain. The Marquis made his son believe that if he just killed his sister and took the amulet, his beloved girl would instantly be his. On the other hand, if the girl was in danger, the father wouldn't save her, because even in death, she would still be Margaret. He kept pushing his son. Luther was in agony, but a voice in his head pleaded with him to stop resisting, because with the power he was gaining, he could defeat any enemy. In that moment, Luther remembered Margaret's face, and the voice kept saying he could get what he wanted. Suddenly, the image shifted, and his beloved was leaving with his damned sister, not looking back, not paying him any mind. The voice grew louder, demanding he kill the thief, and the guy felt a desire for revenge ignite within him. Driven by the intense desire to take down the sister who stole his love, the young man accepted the monster's power. In the morning, Margaret and Verita went to see the prince, who was surprised they were so eager to start their business. His Highness also knew that the girl must have prepared a little gift for him. She jokingly called His Highness a tyrant, who had everything yet still wanted her gift. The conversation was amusing, but the prince felt it necessary to clarify certain points to avoid any misunderstandings. Being paid with tea and cookies seemed a bit ridiculous, but Verita still swore her allegiance to the prince. Kyle wasn't stupid. He knew that if this visit wasn't about business, something else must have happened, and he wanted to know what it was. It was obvious the prince didn't want to talk business, but wanted to be alone with Margaret. This was good for their relationship, even if they didn't know each other very well yet. It started with surveillance on the Alden estate. Because of the night order, her people had to watch from a distance. Kyle was impressed by her composure, even though her words basically admitted she was the one who attacked Ananta. Verita had kept this secret from her friend until now, so the prince didn't know what she was trying to do by being so frank. Also, no one was watching them during the picnic, which meant Carlos and Luther knew about her business. Kyle didn't even want to know what else she had done, but the lack of surveillance was just too suspicious. That's why the heroine snuck back to her old mansion that night to check things out. The prince was stunned. Basically, a few kids had outsmarted his men. The problem was that the house was empty. Kyle couldn't believe it because his men had been watching the place. day and night. Like it or not, those snakes always had secret escape routes in his house. This was a major blow to His Highness, as the old Marquis had completely played him. Since Verita knew her father and Luther wouldn't just sit back and do nothing, it was crucial to catch them, and the prince promised to hunt them down. Verita apologized to her friend for having to pause their plans, because figuring out what her father and brother were plotting was more important. His Highness also reminded Margaret that she was in danger as well. I mean, think about it. Old Alden wanted that amulet for himself, and Luther was after the girl herself. So Kyle and Verita pleaded with Margaret to be careful and to stay with the prince's knights wherever she went. The girl had no choice but to agree. Afterwards, the girls had lunch with the prince, and they were once again amazed at how delicious the food was. Verita noticed that all of Margaret's favorite dishes were on the table, and if she didn't like something, the prince would have it replaced with something else. Suddenly, Noah himself appeared. The warmth in his eyes and his smile once again completely captivated our heroine, and he was clearly happy to see her. The guy remembered that the last time they met, she was on her way to get treatment, so he was glad she had returned in good health. When he mentioned she owed him a visit, Verita gritted her teeth. To be honest, she had forgotten about that promise because she had been so busy thinking about the spell he had cast on her. Noah sighed heavily, dejected that he hadn't heard a peep from her. Had she really forgotten her promise? Not at all. It's just that she had run into a bit of an unexpected situation. The heroine hadn't forgotten anything and promised to come see him once she shed her old self and grew owl-like wings. The guy was devastated by this answer, and she left him to figure out the meaning of her words on his own. He misunderstood her, thinking she just wanted to keep her distance from him. Then he added that she had no idea how dangerous a curious little thing could be. Noah knew that curiosity killed the cat, but at the same time, maybe it could kill someone else too. The guy kissed her hand, saying he had missed her like crazy and that even cleaning had started to become fun. He also hoped she would resolve her situation soon and come back to him, or else he'd have to intervene himself. It was clear from his words that Shrahan was running rampant in the capital. Verita was lost in thought, guessing that the magician's visit to the castle was related to the encroaching darkness. First, she needed to assess the damage, so she asked her friend to wait in the carriage while she went to scout out the situation. After her friend left, the girl called for Reyna and asked if he remembered Noah. He said he did, and then the heroine had her assistant sneak into the man's shadow, which he found him using, thinking it was for the sake of love. So Reyna went to carry out his orders. He needed to remember the entire conversation and not offend these important people. The girl headed for the carriage, knowing she could keep monitoring the situation as long as she didn't talk too much with her friend. But in the courtyard, she was surprised to find Graham talking to Margaret. Verita guessed that the commander's visit to the castle was related to what happened on Mount Moldo and the disappearance of the monsters. The Duke's appearance at the palace was also related. They had invited him because he was a top-class magician who knew more about it than anyone. Graham was dejected that he had to cut their conversation short, but duty called. The knights, however, would escort the ladies home. As the girls climbed into the carriage, Margaret congratulated her friend, noticing the change in her relationship with the knight. Margaret was surprised her friend was so dense as to not see how deeply the commander had fallen for her. Before the broadcast began, Verita decided to tell her friend that she had gained a magic-like power on Mount Moldo. It wasn't exactly magic, more like she had gotten something like a fairy or a sprite. So she had gained a power related to shadows, and now she was going to use it to spy on Noah and the others. There was no need to be nervous, because only she could see the people talking and they couldn't see her. Verita didn't want to scare her friend, but then she added that she had seen monsters on the mountain and knew her friend would have to fight too. It was clear this news scared her, so the heroine started trying to calm her down. But Verita was wrong. Her friend was just stressed about having to deal with monsters on top of being injured. Now Verita was completely stunned because Margaret threatened to roast any monster that dared to mess with her friend. Margaret calmed down, and Verita kept waiting for the movie to start, but never did. It began with Graham reading a report from his men about how many monsters they had seen and where. The highest concentration of them was on Mount Moldo. Noah didn't know why or how the monsters appeared, but he was sure that if they disappeared, it meant they were dead. The situation in the capital was the same as everywhere else, slowly getting worse as the number of monsters was quietly increasing. little by little. Also, Noah noticed that the monsters in the capital were behaving strangely, not hunting as they usually did. They were looking for something, and Verita realized they were looking for her and Reina. The dragon realized the situation was taking a nosedive and that they needed to lie low until this mess blew over. Judging by the sheer number of monsters pouring into the capital, Verita knew Srahan would find her no matter what. The heroine told Reina not to panic, and that it was obvious their enemy was ready to attack, so hiding was futile. That's why she wanted to listen carefully to the rest of the report to get a better grasp of the situation. On the other hand, Graham couldn't figure out what the monsters could possibly be looking for in the capital and why they were so persistent. The prince, however, guessed that their target was the amulet and its guardian. It was a well-founded guess, as Kyle had apparently studied everything about it and discovered there was power hidden within. It was logical to think the monsters wanted that power, but the amulet only appeared after Srahan was sealed. Noah didn't rule out the possibility, since the first such monster appeared right when they got the amulet's guardian. Verita didn't expect things to turn out this way, and the Duke said he had encountered Monster about 2 days ago, before Margaret's ball. The situation was unclear, and Reina realized they weren't hunting Verita, but he wouldn't hesitate to send monsters after her. Things weren't progressing as they had in the original game, so she had her friend come back, as they wouldn't get any more information on their own. After the broadcast ended, Verita told her friends everything she knew. Margaret was obviously shocked about the monsters in the capital. Since there wasn't enough information to draw a conclusion, Verita decided to investigate, but to have someone else do it so Margaret wouldn't have to worry. The heroine had also been wondering where her father and brother had gone, which is why she hadn't been to the garden cafe for a while. But now it was time to talk to Austin because, danger or not, they needed to get to the bottom of things. But as soon as she entered the room, she was surrounded by a crowd of worried employees. They had even found and gathered some rare, eternal youth grass for their mistress at their secret base. The people were as noisy as ever, with some calling Verita a goddess and others a demon of wisdom. The workers promised to bring more herbs and tell her about him later, as she was talking to Austin right now. Verita didn't understand why the workers didn't just eat the herb themselves on the way to her friend's office if it was so precious. Natalie was already waiting for them in the office, lounging on the sofa and making herself completely at home, even though she paid rent. To be honest, the girl thought that if it weren't for her hair color, she could have been the heir to the Alden family. Verita didn't think hair color mattered, but did get her sister on her side. The heroine asked her sister where their father and brother might have run off to, and if their family had any secret hideouts. It turned out they had several, but the black-haired girl guessed they were probably hiding in a place she didn't know about. She pointed out the location she knew on a map, but wasn't sure if her father had shared any important intel with her. Still, they decided to check the known locations just in case they got lucky. They had solved one problem, but there was another, bigger one. Monsters had appeared in the capital. Austin knew monsters had always existed, but the fact that it was being brought up now meant things were very serious. And even Noah had sent his men to clean the things up in the streets, which meant their numbers must be increasing. What was strange was that the monsters seemed to be looking for someone, which made you wonder if they were actually thinking or something. The guy was right. If the monsters were looking for something, Verita wanted them gone. Since they didn't know what to do, she decided to introduce everyone to someone who did. Afterwards, she called for Reina and explained to everyone what needed to be done to defeat the monsters. Verita affectionately introduced her assistant to her friends. Austin and Natalie were terrified when they saw Reina next to Verita. The heroine called Reina a fairy and added that he was the one who helped her find out about her brother and father's disappearance and told her about the monsters. The manager didn't like the creature and didn't believe it could communicate with monsters. To get ahead of the game, Verita suggested finding and capturing a monster for interrogation before Noah killed them all. So Austin should stay home for now, while Natalie would go eliminate her father's mercenaries in the capital. But if she saw a monster, she would signal them. The guy didn't want the heroine to do everything alone, but she had her guards, and they needed to know what the monsters were looking for. Afterwards, the girl and the twins got ready for bed, and Lahir didn't understand why she told everyone about the monsters, especially Margaret. Although she told her friends about the monsters and Reina, the details of that business had to be kept secret. 4 days later, Natalie signaled that she had found a monster, and the twins and Verita rushed to the scene. The monster was in the alley where Ananta used to be, so the heroine had Reina find out Noah's location. Her assistant was always helpful in situations like this where she needed to quietly get information on someone. Now, she had a lot of regrets about it, because Reina was a dragon, and he could have spent his life as he pleased with his shadow magic. Now the girl was a little worried about the dragon, in case he didn't have enough power for what they had planned. Since he used to store energy in his heart, she wanted to unlock his potential without the dragon's heart, but she wasn't sure how to do it yet. When the group arrived at the alley, they saw complete chaos. It seemed Natalie had been bottling up a lot of frustration. They reached the spot, and Natalie was already waiting there. She warned them that the Duke could show up at any moment. Also, the others didn't know about Reina, and if they saw him, it would cause a panic, even if he was a fairy. Meanwhile, Reina returned and reported that the monster hadn't appeared yet, but Noah was here, lurking nearby. And the monsters were acting unusually calm, probably because there were too many people around, which was to Verita's advantage, so she decided to make a move. This was the first monster. Natalie suddenly realized that her sister had seen these things before, and that she had encountered them on her journey. Natalie was angry because she didn't understand how her sister's journey could have involved monsters. So what if Reina was with her? Verita summoned Reina, who confirmed that the creatures were looking for something, so she ordered him to capture one of them. A few seconds later, the assistant caught their target and was about to probe its head. The protagonist's fears were confirmed. Slayon had become more powerful than before. Reina demanded the monster tell him what they were looking for and, more importantly, what their plan was. Reina discovered the monsters were searching for something important, so he needed to know exactly what it was. It turned out they were looking for a sacrifice to resurrect their master, as this special item would grant him special powers. And suddenly, the monster broke free from Reina, and fortunately, the girl managed to catch him. At that moment, 100 red screens popped up in front of the girl, signaling danger. It was clear that if the girl continued to gather information, she would be pushing her luck. She felt a sharp headache, so she looked at her assistant and saw that he was not in good shape. The situation was getting out of control, and Verita ordered Rashiel, Rosh, and Natalie to eliminate the monsters. She was about to leave the alley herself when she suddenly saw a cloaked figure ahead, who was definitely not Noah. When the person pulled down their hood, Verita was stunned. It was Lude, the one who had abandoned the twins. She couldn't believe her brother had become so powerful, but he didn't know why she was so sure. Just then, the system prompted her with a message. Carlos and Lude had obtained dark power and must be stopped. So that was it. Her brother and father had gained power from Slayon. Carlos was furious with his daughter, not understanding how she dared to take everything from them, and felt that even killing her wouldn't be enough to quell his hatred. Verita had only one chance to play for time, so she started by saying that staying by her father's side was a foolish move. Then she reminded her father that people are not property. They don't belong to anyone, and they choose who they stand with. Carlos had no intention of listening to his daughter's lecture and ordered Lude to capture the lowlifes. Natalie noticed the color of her brother's aura had changed, and Verita had the twins fight together. Rashiel and Lude's swords clashed, and the guy hoped his opponent wasn't as skilled as a sword master. But he miscalculated, because Lude Alden's power was now comparable to that of a master like Graham. Rashiel asked his opponent how he had obtained his power, though he himself had no desire to get involved in that kind of thing. Verita walked up to her father and asked him where this power came from and what it was for. Unlike Carlos, the girl understood that the dark power would send him to his grave and then to hell, so he had better face the consequences himself. After all, the truth about Ananta and his other evil deeds had been exposed. The Emperor no longer supported him, and she was storming the magic item market. Only now did the old Alden realize that his daughter was the mastermind behind Ananta's downfall and all the other troubles. She just wanted to correct the mistakes of the game world she had created in reality, and she hoped her loved ones could turn the tide. However, Carlos thought the darkness was right to call Verita a thief, so now he ordered his son to kill his sister. When Carlos called Verita a thief, it had a stimulating effect on Lude. He bypassed all his opponents and attacked his sister. Verita decided to save Reina at all costs, so she threw him into the air to prevent him from being pierced by the sword. She did it just in time, because a second later, Lude's sword would have pierced her. The wound was deep, and she coughed up blood and collapsed. Natalie was completely stunned but she immediately ordered Rosh and Rashiel to capture their father and brother. Her younger siblings didn't need to be told twice. They were burning with a thirst for revenge, ready to make them pay. Natalie rushed to her sister's side, staring at the wound surrounded by darkness. The black-haired woman wanted to take her sister back to the headquarters, which was not far away, but the protagonist's condition was getting worse. Just then, Reyna appeared and began trying to suck the dark energy out of her wound, but she didn't want him to. The whole thing triggered a chain reaction. Verita didn't want to use Reyna's power, but he decided to help anyway, so she reached in her inventory for a potion. The bottled potion might have healed her wound, but this time it didn't work, so the wound remained unhealed. She had never thought things would end this way, but she held on to hope, knowing that Noah would find her. He would come to save her because his spell was still working, or rather, it had been activated, so Noah appeared in the alley, slowly but surely. Natalie didn't expect to see the Duke walking towards them in the alley. Meanwhile, Rosh had already captured and tied up Carlos, but Rashiel was having trouble dealing with Lude. Noah was silent, just staring at Verita, and the fact that she was injured made him furious. So he walked past the girl, past Carlos, stood in front of Lude, and then attacked the guy who had caused all this. He used magic to blast the young Alden into a wall. The impact was that powerful. The guy admitted he hadn't expected this kid to get such a huge power boost, considering he was just a minor character before. The mage now understood why the sword masters couldn't beat him. He had let some kind of strange thing into his body. He wanted to know what kind of entity had given Lude this power he couldn't control, so he wanted to extract it and study it. The Duke tried to suck out Lude's power, not understanding why he was resisting and still protecting his own tail. Since he was being so difficult, Noah decided to turn him into barbecue, as they were being consumed by his flames at that moment. Slahan spoke, saying he hadn't expected things to turn out this way, but he was glad so much prey had gathered here. Noah understood that it wasn't Lude in front of him, but someone else. He wasn't Lude. He said he wanted Verita most of all, because if he devoured her, he could make up for everything she had stolen, as her blood was so delicious and nutritious. He had intended to leave today, but he would eventually return to kill Verita and tear her body to pieces. Just then, Lude activated a vortex of dark magic, and the others were simply unable to stop him. He told everyone present not to rush him, because his time would come soon, and he would come for each and every one of them personally. But just as Lude began to leave, Verita stopped him. She told him that although she was injured, she would recover soon, and when she did, she would find him and teach him a harsh lesson. She was convinced that while she had lost this battle, it didn't mean she had lost the whole war. As soon as Lude left, everyone rushed to Verita. Noah stepped back, knowing it was her magic that had stopped the enemy, even if only temporarily, so he began to heal her, but he didn't expect her to have such a high tolerance for pain. Noah didn't understand why the twins were looking at him with such strange eyes when it was they who had failed to protect their mistress. The twins themselves felt guilty for failing to protect the protagonist. The guy made no secret of his opinion that the brother and sister duo were quite useless as bodyguards right now. Verita was angry because this man was belittling her children just to make himself feel better. After that, the guy started healing the girl, even though he thought she was a bit foolish. Noah knew the protagonist needed to take care of herself, not others. They wished for that too, instead of always seeing her covered in wounds. The guy knew the wound was serious, like internal bleeding, and he was worried about the girl. He felt it was his mistake, so he planned to add more spells to protect her. Noah told her to close her eyes and rest, because he would never let her die. Verita said that if he saved her, she would repay him. He smiled and said he would wait for her to pay off that debt. After that, she had the twins take her back to the Ebon estate. And so, rumors about what happened in the alley spread like wildfire through the capital. Everyone was talking about Verita's attack and how Noah had saved her once again. Kyle received a report that Verita had been attacked and nearly killed, and it sent a cold sweat down his spine because their entire operation had almost been ruined because of it. Natalie sat across from him, understanding his concern, because if her sister died, he would have to work with their old man again. The prince couldn't figure out how this had happened, especially with two sword masters protecting her. Natalie said Lude had been corrupted, so she asked the prince to let her get the truth out of their father. The girl was excited about this, as she could get her thrills and learn everything she needed from him. Kyle agreed. Additionally, the girl said Verita would recover soon. His Highness suddenly asked where the protagonist was, as the commander of the Knights wanted to protect her personally, but Natalie said her sister was safe and sound. Natalie also asked the prince for permission to take down all Alden family members if they tried to escape. Verita's bodyguards were eager for revenge, so she went to ask for the prince's permission. Just then, Noah walked into the office, saying he never thought Verita would get involved in something like this. Kyle didn't recall the ducal family having the right to be on equal footing with the royal family and enter uninvited, but he said he was on urgent business. His Highness was very annoyed by the Duke's rudeness. He had bypassed security and come uninvited. The guy told the prince to calm down, because no one could go against the Emperor's seal. The Duke asked the prince to look at a document Noah had just produced, an Imperial decree. They would officially investigate the Alden case, and all family members had to be captured alive. But Natalie and Verita were not bound by this order, as the former was not a direct heir, and the latter had been attacked by the Marquis. Kyle transferred his authority to Noah, and the Duke refused Graham's help. The mage told Natalie to send the twins to the Alden mansion, as their strength alone would be enough to eradicate that den of snakes. Afterwards, Noah left to handle important matters, but promised the prince he would return. The mage hadn't expected the girl to be so greedy, taking such a big risk for such a small matter. He thought the prices of those items were suspiciously low, and that the girl was planning to replace her father. Now, thinking about magic items in the market, the man recalled something from many years ago. He had received intelligence about a rare, butterfly-shaped magic item. Now, the young man realized that artifact belonged to Verita, and he was completely captivated by her. The Alden mansion was engulfed in flames, and Noah was leading the charge. Everyone thought this was the end of the feud between the two families, but they also knew the Duke had powerful backing. An order was given. All members of the Alden family must come before the Emperor and kneel. If anyone refused the order, the Duke would deal with them. He even sent the twins to clear out the house. He didn't want to stand by, so he summoned flames and set the mansion ablaze. He thought the girl might have wanted to do it herself, but it was her own fault she got hurt. Meanwhile, Kyle and Margaret were having tea. The prince wondered if she knew that the mage had fallen in love with her friend. She didn't answer, but said that Verita never thought she would be hit so hard again. Margaret was in tears. She truly believed that with the twins by her side, her friend would be fine. Then she said Lude and Carlos should be killed immediately, and she imagined a gruesome end for them, describing it in detail. But Margaret knew her friend would never do such a thing, especially when it came to her own father and brother. Margaret continued to surprise the prince, because while Natalie was torturing Carlos and Noah was destroying the mansion, she was asking them to hand Lude over to her. She also knew it would be difficult to capture the guy alive, and if things didn't go well, she told them to finish him on the spot. Kyle agreed, then walked over and put his arm on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Just then, some information popped up. Verita was not at the Ebon house, and Margaret didn't know where she was either. Meanwhile, Verita woke up from a lucid dream and some upgrades to the game settings. But she celebrated waking up too soon, as she had just realized she was in Noah's room. Just as she started to complain about being here, Reyna appeared, saying her wound couldn't be healed all at once. The protagonist was more worried about Reyna, but he was fine. But she couldn't move, or the wound might get infected. For the past 3 days, Reyna had been blaming himself for not being able to defeat the enemy, which led to her injury. Just then, Noah asked if he could enter the room, wanting to know how she was. The guy said he had arranged a room with a magnificent view for her and hadn't cast any magic on it. He suddenly turned around, cleared his throat, and then said he would go get her a robe. Then her words completely caught him off guard, as she felt it wasn't the first time he'd seen her like this, but turned out it was. He also never thought she'd call him a prude, so he looked super excited. First, he draped his own coat over her, even though he knew it wasn't doing his heart any favors. After that, he undid a few buttons on her shirt and started to heal her wound again. Unfortunately, there was nothing more he could do for her, but she still thanked him for saving her life. For the first time, Verita realized that if it weren't for his danger-sensing magic, she would have died in that alley. The guy didn't admit to any magic, just said he heard the fight and came running. She was grateful, of course, but then she told him that he was healing her a little too often. After that, he He leaned in close to her and asked if she liked getting hurt. Then he told her to stop doing things that would get her injured, because he didn't want to see her bleeding out again. Because according to him, all she did was attract enemies like a damn magnet. Just then, a system notification popped up with news about a new feature, like being able to see Noah's affinity level. The girl checked and saw that the guy's affinity was at 57%. The protagonist wanted to see the twins, but they weren't at the mansion, and the mage wouldn't let them in. Noah thought she would recover best in a quiet environment, and then he left. Verita talked with Reyna and realized he had let her get hurt on purpose, and he didn't even deny it. But the girl didn't blame her little companion, because she herself knew that they were no match for Slayon. Slayon probably wanted to eat Reyna because he was a shadow, and their enemy was darkness itself. But Verita didn't think so, because aren't shadows dependent on darkness? Meanwhile, at Verita's headquarters, everyone was silently hating Noah's guts. Natalie was going crazy because not only did the guy heal Verita, he straight up kidnapped her. She knew he was strong, but she didn't think he was so strong that he could snatch her sister from right under the twins' noses. Just then, Reyna emerged from her shadow. Everyone was terrified, thinking something had happened to Verita and were ready to go tear down Noah's place. Reyna began to explain that as soon as he opened his eyes, the Duke appeared and started healing the protagonist. Rashiel didn't understand why they couldn't use their shadow powers and had to wait for Noah to handle everything. Without a doubt, Austin wasn't happy either, but the girl's health came first. The twins were also going crazy, convinced that Verita was looking for them, so they were ready to move immediately. She told Rashiel and Rosh to be patient, but they were sure they could break into the mansion. Furthermore, she told the twins not to be discouraged or blame themselves, because she was fine. She promised to meet them as soon as she was better. She also told them to eat well, not to lose weight, and to sleep well because she would give them a big hug when she returned. The message ended there, and her friends told Reyna to make sure the Duke and Verita kept their distance. Meanwhile, Verita was enjoying a life of luxury, soaking in a fantastic bath. Although she wondered where Lude had gone and what the hell Slayon was up to, this break was wonderful. Besides, she was pondering a more interesting question, Noah's feelings for her. A thought popped into her head that the guy had fallen for her because she was always healing him. To get a better picture, she pulled up his character panel. Margaret's information was almost identical to the original game, which meant this new feature was fantastic. Noah was also still quite direct, except now she could track his location. If you look closely at the map and the marker, you could tell where he was and where she was. The girl was excited because now she was a total cheater in this reality. Just then, she realized the guy was in her room, so she got dressed and went in. He was sitting in a chair, waiting. Noah didn't mind waiting for his guest, as he had decided to take his time. Now that she knew how the guy felt, it was driving her crazy, but she still thanked him for the beautiful dress. He was ready to grant her any request, except for bringing back the twins. The Duke was surprised she didn't call him out for being in her room, but then again, she was being discreet in someone else's house and didn't do it. Noah told her not to talk like that, because he could just waltz into her bedroom at night while she was sleeping. But he wouldn't do that, nor would he keep asking for permission to enter, because that would make him feel like she truly belonged here. The girl felt a warmth and tenderness in her heart, and the Duke was about to tell her something important. Noah informed his guest that the Alden estate had been destroyed and all the descendants had been imprisoned. Verita didn't understand why the Duke had done all this, as he hadn't openly opposed the Alden family before. The man announced that everyone would soon be put on trial and said that the complaint was brilliantly written. Verita realized Noah had guessed she was the one who did it, and then thanked him for the compliment, as it felt good to hear. Noah was glad the girl had shared this with him, and he also happened to find out that Verita was planning to trade in magic artifacts. Verita was pleasantly surprised by the man's sharpness. Moreover, she wasn't trying to run away, as she wanted to negotiate with the mage about the magic items. But before they continued their conversation, the guy said they should have a proper meal, and just then, the food was served. Noah was clearly teasing her, offering to feed her meat with his fork. This completely caught her off guard, so she snatched the utensil and ate it herself. As time went on, the guy's affinity for her grew, and it was now at 59%. The protagonist had no idea what she had done to make his affinity level skyrocket like that. Verita continued to eat, thinking that the guy's affinity grew probably because she had imitated him a little. They decided to have sorbet for dessert, and the girl realized Noah had spent a lot of time preparing this meal. but she felt that Noah wasn't the type to be nice to people for no reason without expecting something in return, so she bluntly asked the guy why he was being so nice to her and what he wanted. He knew she didn't trust him, so he asked how she would have reacted if Graham had done all the same things for her. She still didn't quite get his point, so the mage left, but said he would be back tomorrow to heal her and would be expecting his payment. The Duke was clearly angry, so Verita started racking her brain for how to repay him. Reyna even felt a little sorry for the guy. Back in her room, she checked the quest window and saw that the last quest was only half finished, which meant this was the second round. Reyna told her that Lude had escaped using dark magic and that he had a broken leg. It turned out her brother was useful to slay Han because his hatred for her was the perfect ingredient for dark magic. But Verita had about 2 weeks without having to worry, as her brother was badly injured. To find out her brother's location, she tried to check his character panel, but it was blank. Tracking his location was also impossible because he was on the dark side. The whole thing was a mess, so she asked Reyna to try to recall what he had seen in the monster's mind that day. But my companion couldn't tell me anything, as he only remembered the monster lunging at him. Still, he was ready to say everything he understood, but Verita told him not to if it was too painful. Suddenly, the game system chimed in, saying there was a memory-sharing feature with Reyna that could be activated. She overheard someone, perhaps Reyna himself, talking about resurrection. They were talking about a sacrifice, a form that could greatly enhance the enemy's power. The problem was they were talking about her real soul from another world, so the girl covered her ears, feeling a sharp headache. Still, no, she still didn't understand what Slayhan meant by those distant places. Downstairs in the cafe, everyone was saying the same thing. The capital had become a terrible place to live. Jerome, who was clearing tables, realized that Verita might be just like him. Back at the castle, Graham approached Noah, who was studying some kind of scroll, and asked him a question. The mage was practically glowing with happiness, but the commander of the knights was furious because his girl had been injured that day. The Duke showed the commander the Emperor's order and said he would personally handle the Alden family. Since Noah was going to do all the dirty work himself, he suggested Graham visit the patient, but he couldn't because he didn't know where Verita was, and the prince and Natalie were waiting for him in his office. He had always thought she blindly followed her father, but he had hoped his sister could make her change her stance. Now he felt inferior for not believing in her and not realizing she was being used. She didn't shirk her responsibility for carrying out her father's orders, as she had to hurt people. But since the Emperor had pardoned her, she would atone for her past mistakes through hard work and good deeds. The pleasantries were over, and the prince decided to get straight to the point. During the conversation, Graham learned that Verita was awake and in good condition. Natalie had come today to deliver a message from her sister and to ask the knight to calm down a bit. Verita was safe, but Margaret needed protection, so Graham intended to go to her. Natalie got nothing from interrogating her relatives. It was clear that only Carlos and Lude knew the full picture and the extent of their power. The prince even felt sorry for Lude, who had been dragged into this mess by his own father. Meanwhile, Margaret was alone in her room, terrified. She stared at her amulet, wondering why she was so weak and couldn't help her friend. She broke down in tears, thinking the amulet was useless because things were just getting worse. She was about to smash it when she suddenly noticed someone outside her window. Sure enough, Rosh had come to visit. Margaret told her to come in through the door, but Rosh felt the window was faster. When Margaret said she wanted to smash Lude's head in, Rosh offered to hold him down for her after they caught him. Their conversation was interrupted by Austin, who had followed the girl in through the window. Suddenly, Margaret burst into tears and tried to smash the guy's skull, but Rosh stopped her. The young man pulled down his hood and politely introduced himself to Miss Aberdeen. Austin admitted that as Verita's current deputy, he had a mountain of work on his hands. He was so disgruntled with his boss that he was calling her by her first name. Miss Aberdeen understood completely and offered him some tea. The man admitted he could be in big trouble if he were recognized, and the girl guessed he was some kind of outlaw. Austin covered his face, not understanding how Verita and Margaret could be friends. The girl took it as a compliment. But now it was time for business, and he said they would have met later if not for Verita's actions. This was all because no one could know he was working for Verita until the magic item business was on track. He had come to see Miss Eben today, because Verita couldn't come herself for the time being. He brought her a partnership agreement and asked her to look it over. The document also mentioned transferring power to Austin in case of any unforeseen circumstances. After that, Austin suggested Margaret look for lapis lazuli for the magic items again. Meanwhile, Noah returned home. On the way, he took off all his clothes, and they turned to ash before his eyes. He lit a cigarette and had the servant repeat what he had just said. The man had asked how much longer Velletta would be staying in the guest room. But Noah, sensing something, said he had never authorized anyone to break into his house. He wondered if the guy had stopped considering him the master just because he was away. The guy started to deny it. The guy was frantically slandering Velletta, so Noah threatened to cut out his tongue if he heard such nonsense again. The Duke also warned the servant that if he did not respect Velletta, he would become useless trash to him. The young man trembled all over, not understanding why the master would choose Miss Velletta. The butler understood that the guy's words and actions were all born of jealousy, because the girl had succeeded in capturing the Duke's attention. Meanwhile, Noah was taking a bath, hoping that Miss Velletta would not face any threats in his mansion. The mansion's magic should protect her, and Elliot would be thrown out if he defied his orders. He wondered when everything had changed. Was it when Velletta found an image more suitable for her than a snake? Noah planned to prove his goodwill and love to her day by day with his actions, until her wings were drawn to his presence. So, he came to heal her wounds, and the girl confessed she had been waiting for him. During this time, Velletta had been racking her brains, thinking of how to repay him, and had come up with a price that would sting him just right. This greatly disappointed him, as it was not at all what he had been hoping for.